Oh, yeah, okay, it's short and sweet.
No, the state water resources control board and the coastal commissioners themselves.
You still might turn.
Oh, is that right? I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
When you're at the
It's almost like they're expecting to start.
Yeah, really. I think it's time.
I think it is. All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the August meeting of the Board of Directors for the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. If you're here for something else, you're in the wrong place. So, thank you for coming. I would like to start with the roll call, please.
Director Hoffman? Here. Director Adams?
Here.
Director Edwards?
Here.
Director Evans?
Here.
Director Burns?
Here.
Director Riley?
Here.
And Director Potter? Here. All present.
Thank you. If you'll stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda?
Move
All right.
approval.
Before that, I would like to, given the crowd size this evening, I would like to move our discussion items 16 and 17 to the front, just ahead of public hearings. So, thank you.
Good for you.
Yeah, I gotta get it. So then they would follow item 11.
All right. Move approval with those modifications.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? So then all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. So we will open with oral communications. Anyone wishing to address the board on consent calendar, information items, closed session items, or anything within the board's purview may do so at this time.
Good evening. My name's Ken Dursa, and I'm here tonight regarding A1907-004, CalAm's latest application for a rate increase. And I'm from Spreckles, and I'm representing Spreckles and Oak Hills wastewater ratepayers. We formed what we call a coalition, and we filed a protest, and we've been doing this on and off since 2008. I see Dave can't keep a good man down. In any event, special request number 17 on CalAm's latest application to the PUC. It calls for a Monterey high-cost wastewater fund, and it's to take a certain amount of money from all CalAm customers to deal basically with what's called the active systems in Monterey County. We're paying a lot of money for their wastewater. One of the problems is, and we're not against assisting people, but the problem is that the people they're addressing are in the highest income group zip code in Monterey County. It's about $127,000 along the Highway 68 corridor in Las Palmas and then off of River Road. So what we would suggest is that what really needs to be taken a look at is assisting low-income folks, not simply in wastewater, but in water and across the board. The problem is you have to be really, really low income to qualify for low income assistance, and maybe that needs a look and how that could be done. I've got I did a cut and paste of what we got from CalAm of what it takes to qualify. The other thing is, with the hearings coming up, what we've noticed since CalAm's taken over is a degradation of public information. When we first started, there used to be 11 locations where you could get information, copies of the application and supporting information from CalAm. All the libraries, a location in Watsonville and one in Salinas. Now, beginning a couple years back, a couple applications ago, the only place you could find it, okay, one is here, so I think I've got my numbers wrong. The second place you can access it is CalAm's office, which closes at 4 o'clock over in Pacific Grove, and the application is on the locked second floor. So we think that for the money we're all paying and for all the service they want to give us, you know how they, really that's what it's all about, right? We think that they need to start placing these applications where people can actually see them, and not simply the application, but the supporting evidence. What I found by accident on the PUC website was Mr. Jeffrey Linham's testimony that for some reason was posted up there by accident, and I downloaded it. That information isn't on the website of the PUC, and there's no reason why CalAm can't put it on a CD and put it into the libraries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Anyone else for oral communications?
Good evening. My name is Michael Bear, and I no longer live in Monterey County. My father passed away in June, and I've moved to San Jose to help my mother and settle the estate. So that makes me a disinterested party. I'm no longer a ratepayer. So I only do this from passion now. And I'd like to thank Director Adams and David Stolt for their work at the Board of Supervisors meeting in June. It was a very sad, sad day. But Mary, you did a really fine job of trying to bring out the truth. And I really thank you for what you had to say. And Mr. Stolt, likewise. And so now that one's in the rearview mirror. And up on the horizon is the Coastal Commission. And my understanding is they will be hearing a permit application in November. And I would like for this board to get the information to the Coastal Commission about the impact of the CDO in the wake of all the water we've saved. Mr. Stoltz said there would be no impact for the next 2 years based on where we are, and the Coastal Commission needs that information to make their decision, and they need it well before November. What I've learned from 5 years, and finally I'm a slow learner, staff makes a staff report, and that's really the only place where you have an impact before the staff makes their report. Because once the staff's made their report and you're up there arguing against the staff report, you've already lost the game. You've already learned that. So I would hope that in August or September, you could send a letter to the Coastal Commission on your letterhead and let them know what is the impact of missing milestones so that they can include that in their deliberations. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say. So thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Mr. Bear. My condolences on loss of your father. Anyone else wishing to address the board? Okay, then I will close oral communications and move on to consent calendar. Does anyone have any items wishing to pull for further discussion off the consent calendar?
Through the chair, I'd like to just comment on item 1, but not pull it unless
Okay.
should we pull it?
Yes, let's pull it to make the comment. Thank you. Any other directors? Okay, any members of the public? Okay, so consider item 1 pulled.
Move to approve the remaining consent agenda.
Okay, we have a motion, Director Byrne, and a second from Director Adams to approve items 2 through 8. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Director Riley, number 1.
Item 1, I just was reading it, and I think it's just worth repeating because you say it once and then maybe people don't remember. But it's in the minutes and it's reported this way. At their last meeting, our general manager, David Stoll, reported that the district received a letter from CalAm
seemed late, several months. And he also added that, by comparison, the Cal-Am project is 4 years behind schedule. And I just didn't think that that should go unnoticed, or at least not repeated. I just wanted to repeat that information so the public kind of knows that there's a difference in degrees, and there's a difference in fact, and one fact is not equivalent to another fact in this case. I also pointed out that the amount of grant money that's been available to the Cal-Am project is very small compared to the amount of money that's been available to the Pure Water Monterey project. I just think it's worth repeating that the differences are substantial, and thank you. I need all the help I can get. And that's all. I just wanted to repeat the information, because often it gets lost if things aren't repeated. That's all. And I'd like to move what it is, approval of the minutes.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion by Director Riley to approve item number 1 and a second from Director Byrne. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, and we'll pause for a moment. Okay, I'd like to move into item 9, the General Manager's Report. Arlene, for your record, the motion was made by Director Riley to approve, second by Director Byrne, and it was approved unanimously
Okay, thank
for
you.
item number 1.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the monthly compliance report coming up on your screen. The first item is an overview of actual versus budget in terms of production. Arlene, did you hand this to me on? Go ahead, next slide.
Is it, it's not, okay. Why not, I'm gonna give you another, I'm gonna give you the other.
All righty. Just move it around. Yeah. There we go. Okay, sorry for that. This is, again, the Carmel River and the Seaside Basin relative to the CDO targets and the adjudication. The highlight here is that we are doing better than budget. The Seaside groundwater has been in exceedance of the current adjudicated levels, whereas the river's been under, and the net result is that overall the water resource system is under. And we've got a couple more months for that to change a little bit. One highlight is the difference between this year and last year. And I think you'll see from the next chart why it looks like we're doing worse than last year when in fact we aren't. So in this one you can see most recently ASR recovery is 0 relative to the target, but last year there was 403 acre feet of difference. So that would mean that the river would be less stressed because of the recovery of ASR. And so on the previous chart, you see the total is actually then higher this year versus last year, and that was because they had additional ASR recovery. Sand City desal continues to struggle a little bit with only 8 acre feet in this last month. But generally speaking, and you can see table 13 shut down because that's all relative to the amount of rainfall and excess flows that we had in the river. So as kind of predicted. This is production for delivery to customer service, which is what we use as a proxy for demand. You can see that we're still significantly below last year by 110 acre feet, so consumer demand remains dampened. Interestingly, in June, that 905 total acre feet was still actually higher than last year by 14 acre feet, so the US Open didn't have any pronounced impact that we thought it would, and we'll check the same for Car Week, because this was both a heat wave and car week at the same time. And then finally, not much to talk about on rainfall. We had 0 in July, but we're still at 146% of long-term average. And then on unimpaired flow, the winter rains continue to release flow through June and July. So you see that the current bars, the blue bars, were higher than the long-term average bars in those months. So that bodes well for a wetted front of the river and storage behind the dam. So things are looking pretty good. We're at 216% of long-term average year to date. So everything compliance-wise looks pretty good going into the last 2 months of the water year. And with that, that concludes my report unless you have questions.
Thank you. Directors, any questions? Okay. And then we'll move on to the attorney's report on the 6:30 closed session.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board. Tonight, the board met in closed session, one item pursuant to Government Code 54957.6. The general manager provided a report, guidance was provided, but no reportable action was taken.
Okay. Thank you. All right, moving on to item 11, director's reports, including AB 1234 reports on trips, conference attendance, meetings. Directors, anything to report?
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Director Riley?
I'll let you go ahead.
I attended the Water Master meeting about 2 weeks ago. Interesting. There was an election for vice chair or vice president or vice something, but it was the number 2 position there. It was a close battle between Marianne Carbone and John Galati, I believe that's his name, from Delray Oaks. It was a nip and tuck battle, and Marianne Carbone won 4-3, so she's the new vice chair. But the 2 things that I wanted to comment on at the meeting, which I did, and I hope to follow up on this. One was that I was concerned that the Seaside Groundwater Basin is a reservoir. It's not just an overdrafted basin. It's a reservoir. And I wanted to encourage the people on the board and others to think of it as an asset, think of it as something that can be used for future asset purposes like storage, and not just fill it up to protect it, but to use it as a dam, as a reservoir. And that means broadening the horizon of, broadening the kind of context of how it might be discussed or considered or whatever. It's not just something to rescue or something to save or something to return to a steady state, but something that can be used in other ways. So I don't know where that's going to go. I'm going to keep pushing it for more discussion and more, hopefully, more options, including here at some point that when we get a chance to discuss things like that. The other thing I wanted to raise is that there's a calculation that's used where Cal-Am and the city of Seaside can use in lieu project expenditures instead of refilling the basin. And they use it as a balancing act between if the basin is overdrafted, they need one of 2 things: water to fill the basin, or money to buy water to fill the basin. But the projects are considered in lieu payments, and I'd like to raise questions about what the actual status of that means for the basin, because it's one thing to have a calculation about kind of balancing the books, and it's another thing to actually have water or something physical related to the basin. And I'd like to get into that in more detail. I've raised the question. I don't know where that's going to go either, but I'm just going to tell you that that's where some of the discussion hopefully will go in the future. Otherwise, the basin's in good shape. So I'll just say that. It's not. There's no seawater intrusion, and they're monitoring things. And I once raised a question, I don't remember who was here or not, about some subsidence issues. I'm not on that agenda anymore. I've kind of been knocked down on the facts on that, so I didn't have all the facts when I was raising that before. But anyway, that's kind of an update, and it will be interesting going forward. And I'm open to any suggestions anybody has on what I should be doing there. Thank you.
Great. Director Edwards?
Okay, thank you. I was going to let Supervisor, you got.
All I want to say is that I regret that I was unable to attend the Seaside Basin meeting last week, and I think the chair is here, so my regrets. I had something that I don't seem to be able to shake.
Okay, to go quickly, After our last board meeting, I attended the special district meeting, and Senator Bill Monty was there, and he spoke to us. And that last month, he approved SB 2000. The governor signed that. That's a safe and affordable drinking water fund, 1.4 billion over a decade to help the communities that need help with water. So that has been signed. And we also talked a little bit about an infrastructure bill. I think Dave Stokes, our general manager, could probably tell us a little bit more. We're trying to change that to what, 2/3 or whatever. It used to be 55. You needed 55% to pass a bill. Now we're trying to get it lower than that. And that's state, everybody got to vote on that to be changed. And my next.
It failed, they voted on it.
Oh, it failed? Okay.
Oh.
Thank you.
Real-time
All right.
information.
Thank you for the
And
update.
I'd like to thank our general manager. He's been doing presentations all around the place. And I know he did Board of Supervisors. I know he did Seaside. He'll be back in Seaside tomorrow night to do another presentation or answer questions. And I want to thank him for doing such a good job, because I watch him on TV and I follow him around. So he does a good job. Director Rowley brought up a good point. He was at special district with me. He brought up a good point about the Seaside Basin. I like to request a presentation on the Seaside Basin groundwater water master. And talking about the adjudication, who could put water in the Seaside Basin? Can water go from the Seaside Basin to Marina Coastal? I like to have all those questions answered for us and give a board presentation. Line that up. I know it might take a little bit, but I think a lot of questions need to be answered about the Seaside Basin and the health, and especially the adjudication. Get those signed off and see where we're going. So that's a future one. I like you bringing it up, Director Rowley. I appreciate it, and that's all I have to report.
Okay. Does anybody have any other reports on trips, conferences, meetings, etc.? Sure. Tell us about it.
Thank you. I did want to mention that the appeal by the Marina Coast Water District of the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District Carmel Valley Pump Station Facilities is going to be heard by the Board of Supervisors on August 27th.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, from there, I'm going to move on to our relocated agenda item number 16, report from the general manager on pursuing public ownership of Monterey Public Water System.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Typically, I just refer you to the staff note and let things speak for themselves, but I did do a brief overview here so we can just touch on some of the highlights. So the initiative, which was passed, Measure J, in effect created an ordinance or created a new rule that we passed by ordinance immediately upon certification of the election results. In Rule 19.8, there's a specific requirement that the general manager shall, within 9 months of the effective date of this rule, complete and submit to the board a written plan as to the means to adopt and implement the policy, which refers to another section, Section A of the rule, which basically says if and when feasible to secure and maintain public ownership of all water systems in its territory. So you have in front of you a written plan, a little bit ahead of schedule, and it addresses some of the subtext to that whole section or new rule. And then there's some principal conclusions. I've highlighted the primary conclusions, the ones that have the greatest import. And in effect, you'll see in the report that the framers of the initiative may have intended us to look at only CalAm, but the result is that there are 23 private water systems within our service territory that are not publicly owned. And so the recommendation is to examine the feasibility of acquiring the main system rather than a bunch of smaller, discontiguous, challenging to operate systems that would more than likely fail the criterion of feasible because of their disaggregate nature. So that's one of the primary systems. And then you can consider other systems as little tuck-ins, if you will, after that. So what assets are we really referring to? There are assets within the district and there are assets outside of the district. The ones within the district that we recommend to be looking at, the Cal-Am main system, inclusive of Ryan Ranch, Bishop, Hidden Hills, the Monterey Pipeline, recently completed and put into service, the 2 new ASR wells to serve the desalination plant, the transmission main, the majority of which is in our service territory, and then the assets that are directly related to the provision of service for our jurisdiction citizens, includes the desalination plant, the rest of the desal pipeline, the Castroville pipeline, and the remainder of the transmission main. So these are the assets that we've asked the consulting team to put together their analysis on. The other major principal conclusions are to evaluate these 4 measures, which when taken collectively would be enough to acquire and satisfy the criterion of feasible in Section A of the rule. So one is the cost to ratepayers. Will it be less costly to operate? How soon will those cost savings come? This was a lot of the discussion we had during those listening sessions. Quality and delivery of service. Can we be highly confident that we can deliver as good as or better service than the current operator? Governance. Will public ownership provide greater local control, oversight, and transparency? And will it pass muster under eminent domain law? So as you move forward, the primacy of our feasibility study is really that first bullet point. And then once you learn whether there is the potential for cost savings, you will still be factoring in, kind of in your decision making, the remaining other 3 measures of feasibility, if you will. Other principal conclusions: will there be enough cost savings that you can head into a bench trial and a jury trial with the comfort of knowing that if the result is actually greater than what you anticipated and what you did your analysis on, there's still room? And do you have a sufficient and defensible operations plan before you even consider a resolution of necessity? And for now, exclude non-potable systems from consideration. That's mostly because they're already primarily publicly owned, except for small irrigation systems for private ag and landscaping purposes. So determining financial feasibility, you may recall this chart from back in January, but we have a team in place of experts who are looking at different measures of value of the system: the replacement cost new less depreciation, the income approach, and the market approach. They're converting that acquisition fully loaded for other upfront transition costs, legal expenses, transaction costs, and converting it to public debt. And then you substitute that public debt into a cost of service model, replacing Cal-Am's financing, return, taxes, and other things, and then see if it's a lower cost of service. So that's what we call cost of service modeling. We have that well underway. We've got an all-star team of consultants who will, to the public's interest, all be revealed with the report that will be coming out in November. The work product is due to District Council 3rd week of September. A draft report and presentation with your eminent domain attorneys would happen the 1st week of October. The 1st week of November, there would be a public release based on any questions and comments and changes made between your discussion and being ready to release to the public. A public workshop will be held away from this building with a few more chairs in it the 2nd week of November, and Arlene's working on venues for that right now. And then if feasibility is indicated, I would imagine that we would present to all the city councils and other organizations principal assumptions, findings, conclusions, and then the board will kind of take measure of all of that and then convene to decide whether to proceed to next steps and what those next steps would be. The consultant spending to date, I believe we had a director ask for this. We do put a report in the very back of the board packet, but we are just over 240,000 in expenditures, 241, and the remaining budget that we have is about 408. So if you have any questions on that, I'm happy to answer it. And keep in mind, this is a long-term process if feasibility is indicated. This is just the first step. The right to take bench trial would happen only if you pass a resolution of necessity, and to get your ducks in a row for that would require some additional work on an operations plan, comfort around financing, more discussion about legal permissibility and so forth. And that's what I have. The report does kind of speak for itself at the point we are at right now. There is discussion about what the consulting team has been tasked with, and I think that's a pretty good indication to folks what's being worked on right now. We're getting real close to the finish line.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions for staff from directors? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Dave, feasibility, is that a 2/3 vote? That will be all the way through, we're gonna have to produce a 2/3 vote on each stage that we go through?
No, just one stage. And this lit up the inbox on the email over the weekend, thanks to Jim Johnson's article. Yeah, the Code of Civil Procedure, section 1245.240 provides, and I'll just quote, unless a greater vote is required by statute, charter, or ordinance, the resolution of necessity, so it's the one event where you as a board would decide you want to proceed with a condemnation action. That resolution of necessity shall be adopted by a vote of 2/3 of all the members of the governing body of the public entity. The appeals court had upheld that means 2/3 of the whole body, not 2/3 of who's there on that day. There was a specific case where a 5-member board had a conflict of interest on 1 member, and so they needed a 4-member unanimous vote of the remaining 4 members. And so it's pretty strongly enforced that it'll be 5 of 7 required. So should feasibility be indicated, and again, there's the financial feasibility that we're working on right now, but then there's operational feasibility, implementability on the legal side, whether you're comfortable with an operations plan that can be executed. You will have the discretion that you need at that moment, but it's going to have to be 5 votes.
So, looking at the schedule, are we gonna have all that information? We're talking about the next 4 months, and before Chair Evans leaves, we're gonna have a vote.
No, probably not.
Thank you.
Especially,
I'm not going anywhere.
especially,
This timetable is setting us up for February 2020, or it might be longer than that. Because
it's
I'm worried about the timetable.
yeah, it's setting
They're
you
gonna
up.
hold us.
So if feasibility is indicated, then it's setting you up to continue to listen to the community, do some presentations, make sure that everybody who didn't go to the public hearing or read the report knows what the game is. And then you would have the option of saying, well, based on what I've heard, or based on what I feel, or based on what I've seen right now, I don't think it's feasible, or I think it's feasible. And if the consensus is it's feasible, you're not having that 5-person requirement at that point in time. What you're then saying is, well, should we head to the bench trial? Should we head to adopting a resolution of necessity? And in order to do that, what are the other things that we are going to need? And the things you're going to need at that point in time are findings, an operating plan that's defensible, an understanding of how much wiggle room you might have, those kind of things to give you the comfort to say, all right, let's get through the next steps that will give us the comfort we need to adopt that resolution. And that could take 6 months, it could take 18 months.
Okay, because the way this is lined up, I'm thinking it's gonna be a vote in February
Right.
or before that, and we still got work to do. And I
Right.
want the community to understand that there's still work to do. Don't hold us to the schedule.
Yeah, this schedule, you'll be able to, on a simple majority of the board, say, or even the general direction of the board, say, we're comfortable enough to move to the next step. Now, set us up for a successful bench trial, and you wouldn't even adopt the resolution of necessity unless you thought you could be successful at the bench trial. And so that's where I say 6 months to 18 months, because there may be some more pieces of information you're going to want to have in your hands before you write and adopt a resolution of necessity.
That's all I have for right now.
Okay, any other directors with questions?
I just said, if you could clarify for me, Dave, the relationship of the Castroville pipeline to the.
Right. So that's the, you would think that it makes no sense for us to get involved with, except it serves the return water obligation of the desal plant. So let's say there's 3 to 7% of fresh water indicated by the molecular analysis, and you've got to return that to be consistent with the agency act that says no exports of Salinas Valley groundwater. So that's the mechanism to return that Salinas Valley groundwater back to the Salinas Valley. And so from our standpoint, it's an inherent feature of the desalination plant rather than a water supply to Castroville.
All right, if there are no other questions, I will open this up to public comment. And if you do plan to speak, feel free to queue up.
Michael Bear. So I noticed from the timeline that the public will be hearing about this in the first week of November, and that there'll be hearings in the second week of November. The second week of November is also when the Coastal Commission will be considering the permit. The current understanding is that's when it's going to happen, and it could be it's November because that's when they come to the Central Coast, which could be anywhere from Half Moon Bay to San Luis Obispo. And so I would request that you would please postpone that thing for a week, because that's a huge meeting. There's a lot going on, and to have to do 2 of these meetings on the same week, and their meetings are Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we don't know which day it'll be, so there won't be a schedule conflict. I would ask that you would please not have the public discussion on the second week. The third week would probably still work with your timeline.
Thank you, Mr. Bear.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Kevin Tilden. I serve as Vice President of California American Water. As we just got this agenda information Friday night, I'm going to offer some verbal comments tonight about what we believe are some legal deficiencies in the report. And if your board and council are willing to engage, our attorneys will be happy to write a letter with more information, background information in the next few days. The election was November 6th, and 9 months later, I think voters expected a feasibility study. And whether they misread the ballot measure or not, I will leave that to you all, but clearly what we have tonight is not a feasibility study. The report also fails to mention the need for your agency to go to LAFCO through that LAFCO process to seek approval for your district to provide a new class of service. This will add time, cost, and uncertainty that was not reflected in the report. I'm unclear whether your legal team missed this or whether they're aware of it and chose not to disclose it to the public as part of this process. Either way, it should be troubling to you as board members and to voters. The report also does state the district may condemn assets outside your district boundaries. This is a bold statement that's inconsistent with your enabling legislation. Your enabling legislation specifically discusses that. If you believe this to be true, we'd like you to cite what legal precedent or case you're citing, because it is inconsistent with our view of the law at this time. On page 11, the report also states the district's entitled to a conclusive presumption that the condemnation is in the public interest. This is absolutely incorrect. The district is not entitled to a conclusive presumption, but a rebuttable presumption. Again, as board members, we suggest you direct your manager and general counsel to release all legal opinions that support this incorrect statement. In addition, the report discusses a more necessary public use, as if that's a simple box to check. We believe you can only make an informed decision if you request background on this when the threshold has been met in other water condemnation cases. Review the Claremont decision. This is a very, very high standard. One of the 4 points on there for evaluation was if you can provide the same or better class of service. That is not what works in court. What works in court is a superior. If a like agency provides like service, then that's not, there's no public benefit to you all taking over our system. Again, the report should include legal opinions that support how you came to that conclusion. The report also failed to mention severance damages, which could be the hundreds of millions of dollars in this case. While we recognize what is in front of you tonight is not a feasibility study, even a plan to produce a feasibility study should not overlook this important element, which could be a substantial part of the price as a whole and could in the end determine whether this is feasible or not. The report did correctly point out to the board that a resolution of necessity would require 5 of 7 votes, which has been discussed tonight, so we're glad that's finally come to light. And it did also discuss that the secret process, and this could be defined as a project we're happy about. Both of these are important to you and your constituents as well. So I will leave it to you all to get back to us and let us know whether you'd like our attorneys to provide more information on the questions raised or not, but certainly we'd be happy to help in any way we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tilden. Anyone else wishing to speak? Again, if you do plan to speak, feel free to get in line.
Hello, Mary Ann Carbone, Sand City resident. And I just wanted to say that the report is an excellent discussion of the process, and it could have been given 6 months ago. I simply would like to appear before you this evening to say that the report doesn't do this. It doesn't describe to the voters what is the definition of feasibility. It is the responsibility of you, the board of directors, to define what feasibility is and not that of consultants. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carbone.
Good evening, Madam Chair, board members. My name is John Tilley. I'm co-chair of the Coalition of Peninsula Businesses. I'm also a resident within the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. After reading the plan tonight, I would like to make 2 comments. They are the exact same comments I have been making for a number of months already. The first is that I encourage you to pursue the feasibility study and any subsequent reports as preparation for a jury trial. Please do not tilt the reports to favor Measure J or to justify Measure J. If taking over CalAm is justified, then let a fair feasibility study that will stand up in court make the case for you. My second point is also one that I've been saying for a while. The plan presented tonight looks like a very expensive undertaking to me. Please do not let a failed pursuit of CalAm create financial hardship for the district and the populace. If you're going to follow this plan to its conclusion, please be sure that you have the required resources in place to do so. The district is already supporting Monterey One Water, and the reserves of the district are not sufficient to support a failed takeover effort. While the concept of lower prices is appealing, I encourage you to be willing to call off the takeover attempt if you doubt it will prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley.
Kevin Dayton, Government Affairs Liaison for the Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. First, I think the report, I actually enjoyed reading it. It was well organized, clearly written. I think it's something I'm going to be distributing to other people in the community because it's easy for them to look at various points and read it. So I think it was a good job beginning to lay the framework for feasibility consideration. Of course, it isn't actually a feasibility study, and it doesn't actually define feasibility, so you've got a ways to go. But I think it's a good start. Love the title of the document as well. It really gives people a clear understanding of what this is really about, which is about a government takeover of a private entity. In fact, I just tweeted out a joke. You could replace water supply with grocery stores and change it around and see how it would work. It's actually a fascinating document about how to evaluate and decide on whether or not government should take over something that the private sector is doing right now. Look forward to seeing more about it. You've definitely got a long way to go. I did like the statement about the 2/3 vote, and I'm sure some people are unhappy about that because it's not democratic. Just a reminder, I like the constitutional republic we live in, and the supermajority is an important tool of a constitutional republic. It's to be careful of democratic will that is unwise and destructive. So you should be praising that 2/3 as an extra step of protection for the people of this area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'm Rick Corey. I'm president of the Monterey Peninsula Taxpayers Association. It was despite most government documents, it's actually fairly easy to read and understand, and I commend you for that. I think it was also very important because it made clear to the public that the initiative wasn't directly aimed at CalAm. It was aimed at every single private water system that exists within the district boundaries. And whether or not it's feasible to take them over before a CalAm or with a CalAm is a decision ultimately you have to make, but it's not just CalAm that's covered by the initiative and by the rule you put in place. The other thing is I think that the 2/3 aspect is the least that should be given the financial magnitude and the potential impact for generations on this community. If it is not so clearly feasible for you, likely to getting 2/3 is less. It requires it to really be crystal clear that it's feasible to be able to get that strong a vote, which I think is the way it should be before we go down that road and make a decision of that magnitude. The other thing is one of the criteria you're ultimately going to have to rule on is, public versus private, and the assumption everyone has that
public is more transparent than private. It has not been transparent so far on this process with the feasibility study. We don't even know who the consultants are who are doing it. So it is not automatic decision that things are transparent when it comes to public versus not. I've been to plenty of their agencies where to find out true aspects of their budget, you have to go digging for yourself. It's not real easy to find. So that's not an automatic to be given. So let's hope there's a way to prove that it will be that way, or else that's just a statement that has no basis of fact, potentially. You all may be as transparent as can be. Your successors may not be. There's no guarantee of that. So having that as one of the things, if that were to be alone, I would say is nowhere near enough of a standard. Feasibility is, are we going to save money day one? That was what was sold to the public. And if we're not, it's not feasible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyer.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jeff Davey, a lifelong resident of the Monterey Peninsula, also the co-chair of the Coalition of Peninsula Businesses. I'd hoped the report was going to cover feasibility as well, but it obviously did not, and I understand it's forthcoming. And I want to just make sure and echo the comments that we've made before here at the podium. That is the most important section of what we're doing in this particular area. The feasibility is critical, and the definition of it, and of course, the savings to the ratepayer. And we're looking forward to that report and make sure we only proceed if it is feasible. We don't proceed if it is not feasible. I also appreciate the summary that was provided because I was, in reading the report, wanted to make sure that whatever we do in the analysis, the desal plant as proposed is included, and it looks like and sounds like it's going to be included in the analysis, so we appreciate that, and thank you. And then finally, remember the CDO. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Davey.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, John Narigi. I was encouraged to see a number of the off-ramps contained in the GM's report for the board might proceed with the takeover. I think it's very critical that they are included and taken seriously. I do believe it's a little bit unfortunate, although I thought the report also was very well done. The feasibility study is not complete at this time with only the GM's report on how the process may work and what components the board is required to consider. Would say between the legal costs and the cost of a takeover, the ability to show immediate savings to the public, which is critical, would be difficult. The board will have opportunity to go back and say no if the takeover cost is too high and no clear benefit is shown. The whole basis of the takeover effort was the cost. The service by CalAm has really never been in question. A couple other comments. Report appears to suggest you could take the desal plant by eminent domain. After Dave's presentation, I agree with Mr. Davey's comment, but you don't speak to that if you go into eminent domain, and not clear you would intend to take on the desal plant. At a previous water management meeting, several people in the public made it very clear that that was critical. And in Exhibit 16.4, Table 4, it also states, water resource sustainability is a critical component, and the desal plant does provide that sustainability. Believe the competency with daily service regarding CalAm is also kind of up in the air. How will that component be evaluated based on CalAm's overall operation and service levels? Nothing is really stated that I could find in the current report. And how will it be validated? Because cost has been the big topic all this time regarding, I hate CalAm. Rarely do you hear about service, and CalAm provided service on the peninsula for a number of years without any problem and very responsive, at least in my estimation, what I heard from some of the residents. I hope the feasibility study does not take the district staff on board off what I consider to be the real prize. We have worked 9 years for a desal plant. We have approved water supply project by the CPUC. We need to make sure that gets over the finish line. We are at the 95-yard line. The Coastal Commission is the only remaining hurdle, if you will, and hopefully in November sometime they will hear the case and grant the permit. Pure Water, as you know, is running behind their first phase and understood over budget. They are also not a few months behind, but rather a year plus because CalAm gave them over a 1-year grace period. According to old schedules, which I looked up, they were to be pumping water Q1 of 2018. It's now August of 2019. Let's hope the other components of the water supply project stay on the timeline has currently shown. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Narigi.
A couple people now are saying things like Melody Crislock, Public Water Now. A couple people have been claiming that Measure J and Public Water Now said there was going to be immediate savings day one. We never said that. We knew that it would be more affordable over time, and we don't know how long that time would be. But just for the record, that was not our claim. More affordable water, at some point, we knew. We'd seen what Felton did, and we'd seen the graphs of their projections of what it would have cost to stay with Cal-Am and what it was costing them now, 10 years later. And they were substantially less than what it would have been to stay with Cal-Am. We were always aware of that fact, never assuming that it would be necessarily cheaper day one. We hoped it would be. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crislock.
Peter Mountier, PG Chamber. Thank you for preparing this report. It's unfortunate that it comes so far ahead of the release of the feasibility study, but I would echo other speakers' comments in that it was very illuminating, and I certainly appreciated the details provided on the acquisition process. However, I'd just like to reiterate that the community's primary concern remains on the cost of a potential takeover endeavor. Additionally, it seems that the board may only pursue acquisition of certain Cal-Am assets, despite the language in Measure J requiring that all Cal-Am assets be acquired. And I think we'd appreciate some further transparency from legal counsel on that particular concern. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Margaret Ann Coppernall. I'm here this evening to emphasize the fact that a large number of citizens voted to move forward with all Measure J components. Besides the 25,000 in Carmel Valley, Monterey, and Pacific Grove, thousands of citizens in Marina also support Measure J. Why is this so? Because we, the people, want our democratic rights upheld and respected. We are not so much against something as we are for asking our elected public servants to do what the citizens want and what is in the best interest of the public. The Carmel River is under a CDO because Cal-Am mismanaged its water delivery system and overpumped the river to jeopardize protected endangered species, to include us humans. Now the Salinas River is at grave risk because, according to the California Fish and Wildlife Services, the steelhead trout is endangered, as are the freshwater aquifers that are the sole potable water supply source for Marina and the Ord communities. If all of us work together, another CDO for the critically overdrafted Salinas Valley groundwater basin can be avoided, and more reasonable measures enacted, such as Pure Water Monterey expansion. The citizens voted for Measure J and for the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District to proceed with the feasibility process and the necessity element that is embodied in Measure J and its related issues. As a military officer, I spent many years defending the U.S. Constitution. We as citizens have an inherent responsibility, indeed an obligation, to also uphold our Constitution. Water is a basic human right that must be protected and defended as such, preventing it being held hostage to political vagaries and disregard for doing what is right. As Founding Father Alexander Hamilton advised, when injustice becomes law, protest becomes duty. I urge you to follow through supporting the wishes and votes of the people. We are in favor of following through with a resolution of necessity to ensure enactment of Measure J. It is just and fair action. Please be visionary and proactive now to prevent a future tragic situation. You will be glad you did. And thank you very much. This is a really auspicious body. Glad to meet you. My first time here.
Thank you, Ms. Coppernall.
Greetings, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Paul Bruno. I'm a resident of the Monterey area. I do not envy this board. Big decisions lie ahead. Tough decisions lie ahead. You know you're going to make some people happy, and you're going to make some people very angry. I'd like to thank the general manager for his report. Thank you for making it public. I'm a proponent of transparency and would hope for more in this process. I took special interest in the section entitled, quote, "How shall such assets be managed?" The report states, quote, In its examination of financial feasibility, the district should examine two operating scenarios. One, integration of operations with the existing employees of CalAm, and two, contract operations using third-party service providers such as Jacobs, Veolia, Suez, ID, and others. Wow. Scenario 2 abandons the existing employees of CalAm. This is contrary to the promises made to the public during the Measure J campaign. In the pursuit of cost savings, is this district really going to try to shake it out of the employees of CalAm? You know, many of these people have been long-term members of this community. They've worked for CalAm for many years. So the question, is scenario 2 in there because the district knows that using the existing staff will not result in savings? You know, taking on the system with the existing staff and existing union contracts, you know, there's a lot of obligations that come along with that, a lot of costs. Is scenario 2 in there because the district knows that hiring the employees cannot result in a better quality of service? Quality of service is one of the 4 measures of feasibility. How will you get a better quality of service with the same people? Like I said, you have some tough decisions ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno. Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Anna Thompson. I live in Carmel. I was not prepared to say anything tonight. However, I'm very concerned that a corporation whose interests are making maximize the profits and grow their business, they're allowed to have all the power to determine what are the water policies that are good for our communities. That is a cost that needs to be put into place in that if we don't own the CalAm desal plant, actually we don't want the desal plant because in fact it was a terrible decision that CalAm made to request a desalination plant to meet our water supply needs and not accepting to do an evaluation of the Pure Water Monterey expansion project, which is the far the more cost-effective, energy-efficient, and environmentally superior water supply solution. Its development and implementation will solve all our water supply needs for many years to come for 1/3 the cost of the desal plant. Also, it will provide sufficient water for future growth. Contrary to the coastal and problematic CalAm desal plant, there are no legal or environmental issues associated with the Pure Water Monterey expansion project. In fact, the Pure Water Monterey expansion project has already been approved as the backup plan, and its development could begin with no delays. Why then did the supervisors and CalAm do not require to do a cost-benefit analysis in comparison to the 2 alternatives? The only reason given that the CalAm desal plant is the only solution to our water supply needs for economic growth and the development of affordable housing. That's a false assertion. I wonder how is it that paying 3 times more for water is good for the economic growth and the development of affordable housing. Most of the growth in the Monterey Peninsula is occurring in Marina, and the Marina residents get no water benefit, only potential harm to the Marina water basin and coastal environment. This is what we need, why we're asking to purchase CalAm's plant. I'm sorry, I'm confused here. That is the reason we don't want it to be held hostages for now and the future to corporations to make water decisions which are costly and also could destroy our environment. That is the most important reason to me. That's a terrible cost that we're gonna have to pay for it. Not just for the current generation, but for future generations as well.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
But it's very critical that you consider that. Thank you so much for listening.
Judy Layden. Just a couple of comments on things that were said tonight. We all have to be concerned with showing mutual respect for different sides of people seeing things. The transparency I thought was very well explained about not having the information of who your consultants are at this point, because they need to remain independent and not have any pressure put on them. So appreciate the fact that in due time we will have that information, and that seems to be appropriate in my aspect. Also, the comment about how taking over the water system will soon digress into taking over grocery stores seems disingenuous at best, but water is a necessity, and grocery stores, there's plenty of them, so competition is there. This is really a limited item that's available. So I just wanted to clear that up, that we need to be more respectful and truthful on our presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lehman.
I didn't stand up to defend the grocery stores. I can guarantee that. But that was a free one. But you know, what I wanted to say.
Would you please state your name?
Daryl Chote, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
56 years living in Seaside, probably one of the young guys in here. But you know, what's puzzling me, I'm listening at both sides, and I'm listening, and it's real funny. This process goes on so long that I've watched this board change 3 times since this process started. And it's really funny, but we got to get to somewhere. You know, this bickering and backering, both sides. And I'm sorry, I don't believe that we should be owning the water, because it's like starting from the bottom, you know. But I think we need to do the feasibility study and stop taking time and get it over with, so that at least we know what it's going to cost. The real facts. You know, we can keep talking for a long time. Like Alvin said, this seems like it's going into a whole nother year, and it's going to continue going into another year, because somebody's not going to like what comes back from the feasibility study. So it's going to keep switching. We got to make a decision. You guys really don't understand, but you're making a decision not based on what you see today, these young people. I mean, you guys know how hard it is to get an apartment in this peninsula now? If you lived here, you're not coming back here. You go to college and you leave. You don't come back. So we got to get to some decisions here. That's what I keep hearing this. One lady came in my store talking about, oh, we're going to own the water. And I said, what? You're going to own the water? How are you going to own the water? And she's about 75 years old. I'm like, by the time that get resolved, you're not going to be around. So, let's be real. Let's be real. This has been going on for a long time. Now, I'm not defending CalAm, but a lot of things CalAm been trying to do, this is the board that stops them. So we got to realize that too. I mean, we probably would have had that dam, but this came in. We can't let 20 people on this peninsula run what's going on in this peninsula. We got to stop that first. We got to put the power with you and trust that you're going to do the right thing. If the feasibility is the only thing stopping us, because $700,000, let's get the feasibility done, stop all the bickering, wait till the feasibility is done, then bring it back, then start the bickering again. That's just me. Sorry about that.
Thank you, sir.
Susan Schiavone, I'm from Seaside. And rather than make a quick decision, I think this is a legacy issue. I don't care if I'm dead when it happens. I want it to happen for the people of this area. I want it to be bought. I want it to be publicly owned. I want a regional powers of public agencies to go forward in the future with a regional desal plant and a good water system that we all share and we all have respect for each other. And if I die before it happens, I'm okay with that, because I'd like to see it as a legacy for the rest of the people that are here. And there will be water for development. We know that Pure Water Monterey will have 1,500 extra acre feet if it is expanding, and that's plenty of water for development for at least 20, 50 years. So let's do a long term. I don't think it's a short term, and I'm okay being in the middle of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Okay.
Good evening, board members. Doug Yount,
Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, chair of the board there. Normally don't come to speak to your auspicious board, but thought I'd do so tonight because it's very important that you, if you're going down this road, to do it very carefully and thoughtfully. And I do applaud the general manager as well for a well-written report. I thought that was good, that outlined the process. But as representing the chamber, it's important that you take the time, you really carefully consider all of the issues that are there. This is probably the most important decision this board will make, save the ones made previously or not, relative to the desal and the long-term water supply. This is the functioning of a future water supply. And the three-prong approach is something that the chamber has always supported, whether it's aquifer storage, or whether it's reclaimed water, or whether it's desal water. All three are very important. And personally, all three should be expanded. And so it's important that there be the ability to provide affordable housing, that there be the ability to provide the apartments that folks talked about, the supply. Our housing supply, our housing issues are not just about affordability of pricing. It's simple economics 101. It's about supply of housing that needs to happen in a responsible, sustainable manner. That can only happen with additional water. And this decision before you needs to take the time and the energy and the effort to go through it very thoughtfully. It will take a long time, and to do it right and not to rush into it. And not to have it be particularly a distraction to an important water supply project that's about to move forward here. In the 20 or 30 years that this body or more that's been in place for the sole purpose of bringing additional water to this peninsula. You're at the goal line, cross the goal line, and then ask yourself, as you go through this study, what type of team do you want to be in the future? But now you do need to get across the goal line. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Dan Turner, Monterey. Well, no surprise. The business community likes Cal-Am. That has to do with Cal-Am having given them a sweetheart deal back in, I think it was September 2013, when they stopped the tiered rate system for businesses. So they'll do anything to keep Cal-Am. Someone said 20 people are trying to, what do we get? We got 20,000 votes or something like that? We've got a lot of votes for Measure J. And let's see, there was something else I was, oh yeah. Ever since the early aughts, 2001 or something like that, Cal-Am has been doubling our water bills every 5-6 years. Right now they claim that it's up to something around $100. If you guys don't get rid of Cal-Am, just you wait and see what our water bills are going to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. As the previous speaker said, this really is a legacy issue. So, screw your courage to the sticking post, and let's vote for that bill of necessity or whatever it's called. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Madam Chair, board members, good evening. My name is Frank Geisler. I am the interim CEO for the Monterey Peninsula Chamber, and I want to thank you for the general manager for his report. I've been a resident of this peninsula for 38 years, business owner, a parent, a volunteer, and I've seen a lot of discussions about water supply. And this report, there's still a lot of questions in my mind. For example, we don't know feasibility. We heard about that. We still don't know if you think you're going to save money. We still don't know if you plan to show public necessity at trial. It feels like there is a lot of information that's held back. And if it's held back because of your negotiation stance with Cal-Am, well, you know, Cal-Am said over and over they're not for sale. So I think that there is a lot of big decisions ahead. There is a potential for huge impacts on our water bills, on our taxes, on our businesses, on our way of life. So the public deserves to have answers to those questions, the business community as well. And I'm looking forward to hear it from you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, is there anyone else? Seeing none. Oh, got one.
Carlos Ramos. I want to set the record straight from a comment that was made a couple of speakers back. This is not just a matter of business. Let me repeat this. This is not just the business community, and God bless them, that they're doing what they're doing. This is a community issue also. In Seaside, there's been coalitions of Latino and non-Latino businesses, educators, yes, civil rights advocates, asking for the water that they deserve. Twice, and for those of you, I've only lived here about, what, almost 20 years, 22 years? Only. But I was here in time to vote, not once, but twice, for a dam. That dam that would have provided the water, but no. Things began even back then with a no. And now, I won't say some of those same people, but the voices that were saying no to a dam that would have provided water to us are now coming up with another alternative, and alternatives are good, but it did not, and it continues not, to take into the consideration of the hardworking folks that makes this peninsula do what it does, I think, very well. But without water, I've heard some hotel people say I would have to cut almost 2 out of 3 employees because they're not in business. Out of 3 or 4 floors, maybe just 1 or 2. Is it an exaggeration? No, it's just an illustration of how and what we would have to sacrifice. Not just for business, but for folks living in the peninsula. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. Is there anyone else? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the board for discussion. Any directors have any comments to make? Yes.
Yes, Chair, thank you. General Manager, how much in the next report is going to be put out? Let's say if we go as far as go through these appraisals, there'd be 1 appraisal, 2 appraisal, and would the public be able to look at it? How much in the next report come out, they're going to know, and how much we probably have redacted out because we're negotiating?
Well, yeah. Let me try to address that, and then maybe a couple clarifications and requests for direction. The next report will reveal the range of value that this board places on the asset. And it will reveal how, if you finance that, inclusive of severance, which was a term that was thrown out earlier, transition costs, transaction costs, fully loaded, can you pay for that and still create savings in the cost of service? Point of clarification, feasible has been defined. It's been defined through our discussions earlier this year and in this report. There's 4 measures, one of which is objective. It's the financial feasibility. That's what this next report will identify. The other 3 measures are things you're going to have to discuss as you want to go forward using your discretion as independently elected and appointed board members. It will have in it available information to see what the assumptions were, what the calculations were, what the comparable deals were. There was a reference to all sorts of legal objections. There's nothing that we heard tonight that isn't already under consideration and in process, and you'll get clarification on those issues. So it'll be pretty crystal clear. There may be some things that we've learned along the way that might affect future litigation position or future negotiating strategy, should it ever go to negotiation, that may not be revealed in the report. And I think we've maintained that pretty much all the way through the discussions since last December. But this is going to be the answer of, does it look like it's in the ratepayer's interest to move forward with all of the considerations given? And you know, as I said, I think I was quoted saying it'll be interesting this autumn, but you know, in November, they're on a schedule. It's pretty hard and fast right now. There may be a lot of writing that has to get done in a short period, but you're going to see technical memoranda. Everything's going to be in an appendix with an executive summary, basically. And you're going to have technical memoranda on value and cost of service, probably woven into a single memorandum. You will receive a legal opinion as to what likely credit there will be, whether the financing can be secured by the enterprise of the system, which was one of the criteria that was discussed back in January. No tax over here and operating costs over here, but all in the enterprise. There will be a legal, so that, I'm sorry, that's not a legal opinion, that's from the investment banking consultant. Bond counsel will then look at that report and say what they've said is bankable from the standpoint of doing a financing, and that whether you have to have a vote for financing or no vote, whether or not the rates and charges are subject to validation or reverse validation. So you will have a roadmap for, if you assume these things, and here's the reason that the assumptions are viable, then here's where you can go. We will have legal opinion on Proposition 218 related items, anywhere from low income rate programs to whether rates need to be in place prior to the acquisition or after the acquisition. What do you do when you have to deliver money and then the company has a chance to appeal? Can you break up your financing? So all of these little matters they're coming together. We will have a woven throughout will be a lot of these legal issues, the California standard, the presumptions that are made, whether in fact you can use eminent domain on assets outside of your service territory because they're there for the benefit of the service territory, and there's body of law that supports that. And so everything's going to be out in front of you. I did want to address one more clarification. There was an issue about contract operations. That model is all of the administrative and planning, rate making, billing functions would be the district. Pumps, pipes, water quality would be contracted. And that's only being looked at because as you go into a unwilling seller situation, it's very likely that they may make the case, our people are not available to you. It's usually a more expensive proposition, anywhere from 15 to 20% more expensive because the operator is trying to build a rate of return. And there's higher initiation costs because you have to get a fleet of vehicles and there's some other things. So it's not because we're worried about the cost of the current good people who know and understand the system, but it may be contended that we can't get them. And so we have to have an alternative that's bankable as well. So those are the types of things that you're going to see, that the public's going to see, that Sarah Rubin's going to ask for anyway. And so we'll be there.
So, gentlemen, what I may see and what the public may not see in that next report. Appraisals, I think they're confidential until after we finish the process. Other things, could you tell us some of those things so they don't think I'm trying to hide it from them?
Right, so you won't have an appraisal. What you'll have are valuations done under several different scenarios and then explanations for why you weight one more than you weight the other and what that weighting yields. And then how we used, you don't want it to, if you're trying to prove feasibility, you don't want to make it look good if you just choose the low number. It's got to look good at the high number too, or else it's probably going to be questionable if it's going to be feasible. So you will see valuations. if you decide to move further and want to head to a bench trial, that's when you'll have a formal appraisal put together. And I think I laid that out in the report. I'll have to
Yes,
go
you
back and
did.
look.
Yes, you did.
And that formal appraisal will then be the basis for making an offer. And that's what will be driving your condemnation action too. And that's why your value will be here based on that formal appraisal. The company's value will be here based on their own version. And that if the bench trial says, yes, it's in the public interest to move forward, that's where you go argue about whose valuation is greater. So where we're going to take you with this effort is just get you enough information for you to say, I'm confident we need to move to that next step, which would be a formal appraisal and a bench trial and operating plan and findings.
So all those numbers you're gonna show me before, they're gonna be able to see
They're going to
too.
see them too.
Okay, I'm satisfied.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
So, I had a question. So, under the 4 things to determine whether it's feasible, cost of ratepayers, quality of service, governance, and legally permissible, governance is one of the things that would have to be sorted out, because is it this board that governs it? Is there a new board overseeing the water? I mean, we don't have answers to that yet.
Right, and the model that we're looking at is this board would govern it. All the activities of this district would carry forward. You'd layer in the administrative functions. Preferably, you'd hire the key employees who want to stay involved. Sometimes the memories are better than the as-built plans. So it would be a different district and probably different style of board member, because people are going to want to get involved at a different level. But yeah, it would be just a typical governmental agency that runs a utility. As stated in here, we do pretty much all these activities at small scale now, but we would be scaling them up through the acquisition of good, talented people.
If I could. So again, just a clarification. So the 4 pillars are all going to be addressed in the release of the feasibility report that we're talking about?
Somewhat. I mean, this feasibility report was primarily about economics. Is it cheaper to run it under public ownership at a price that you believe is close to where it can be acquired? And that's where the discretion of the board is not limited by the initiative, and that's why there has to be a 5+ vote, a majority vote, because you can't preordain what you're going to decide. And so you will have time to question each other over, do we have an operating plan that works? Do we need to develop an even better operating plan? We'll talk about operations. We've got assumptions on the cost of operations here, so assuming one version or the other. But when you ultimately get to, if economic feasibility is indicated, then you still need to firm up how you feel about operations, how you feel about governance. Statement was made here that this is really opaque, but I can tell you when it comes to rate making, you'll see a rate study, you'll see a cost of service study, you'll see a capital improvement plan. Comprehensive planning studies, which the investor-owned utilities use, are under lock and key and not available for anybody to look at. Rate studies are obtuse and hard to understand. So there will be differences, but you will have a chance to talk about those 4 things, but this study is not going to address in depth. There's going to be discussion about what it costs and how much more does it cost if you do contract operations, and what did that do to the cost of service. But it won't have all the ducks lined up in a row that you could go the next day to resolution of necessity.
The people who are concerned about this, I'm not doubting what their motivations are. But I do want to say that every city is an enterprise of operations that has an elected board, and they do a business activity. They manage, they hire and fire people, they collect money, they spend money, they have public input, they're transparent, they have bad services, good services, and various amounts of opinion. Every school district's the same thing. Next door to us, Public Water, Monterey One Water, the public agency. But government board, government structure, they take in money, they spend money, they plan, they do things. The landfill, same thing. So what we're suggesting here is a change to to be a little bit like the rest of the country, because 85% of water is delivered by public agencies now. So this is not an unusual thing. It's unusual for this community. And I'm just all in for, I want to know the facts. I want to know how much it costs. You know, I put my heart and soul on the line for a lot of the arguments around this issue. And now I'm real curious about what the numbers are, because I didn't know the numbers before. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm glad we're being as transparent as we can, and I hope we can continue to stay that way. But I'm also looking forward to what's not public. It's going to be tough.
Thank you. Anything else from the board?
Yeah, just one thing. Don't let us rush you. We need to get it right. I heard people telling me, you said 9 months. No, you got something out this month. And if it take a little bit more time for these other months, I think this community should be willing to stretch it out to get it right. We all need to get it right. So you're doing a good job. And I want you to keep driving on, and I expect results by February.
Madam Chair, there was one item raised when Mr. Tilden was speaking about some of the legal deficiencies in his opinion. He highlighted 5 or 6, maybe 7 items and requested whether we want their attorneys, Manat Phelps and Baker Donaldson, to write a formal letter. I think what I would suggest now as an approach would be for us to just listen to the tape and see if we've got clarity and just go ahead and address our team based on what we heard Kevin say, not ask for a formal legal letter to be delivered at this point. And if you're okay with that direction, that would be my recommendation.
Okay. Any directors have a problem with that recommendation? Pardon?
I think that's a good idea.
You do think it's a good idea? Okay. Do you
I would
have any?
just say if Cal-Am wants to go to the effort of doing it, I mean, we're not in a position to refuse receiving that sort of letter, but yeah, I agree with the concept of we don't necessarily need it at this point.
Very well. So, yes, David, sounds like the board is in favor of your approach at this time.
Yeah, and if I'm confused based on what I hear on the transcript, I'll come back to you.
Fair enough.
We'll do it.
Okay, on that, I will close this item. We'll move on to number 17, which is the allocation of water for affordable housing. I will say that I put this item on the agenda because as the chair, especially this year as chair, I've had a lot of questions with the state coming down on cities mandating certain numbers of affordable housing units be built, that I've been asked why water is holding back our affordable housing. And so while I have not received clarification as to whether the problem with water holding up affordable housing is whether it's an allocation, whether it's not having a meter, or what the precise problem is with water, I thought it was time for this board to discuss ways that we can support our local jurisdictions in their efforts to meet state mandates and build affordable housing. So that's why this item is here. So Dave, I understand you have a presentation for us on this.
Yep. And for anybody who just came for the last item, if they want to leave, that'll actually make the door open a few times. It'll get cooler in here and less bodies. There we go. So I want to just start by talking a little bit about what some of the water barriers are to affordable housing and housing in general. That's a moratorium in setting new meters, and this is a complication that we're not going to be able to undo until the last increment of new water supply comes in and relieves us of the CDO. So this is going to be a constant struggle. And so when I hear from communities that water is my constraint, I always have to ask, is it lack of a meter for like a raw lot development, or is it the lack of an allocation because your jurisdictional allocation has been driven to almost zero, or in Delray Oaks' case, 0? Or are you in a community where entitlement water is so expensive that you can't make an affordable housing development work? And that would be, not unlike Pebble Beach, where it's $25,000 an acre foot, or the Malpaso entitlement, which was 240,
or now Pacific Grove.
or now Pacific Grove. But how much water does a housing unit need? A single-family home is about 1/5 to 1/4 an acre foot. You'll see that consistently in the unincorporated county. There's a few in Pebble Beach that are double that, but generally speaking, that's a normal single-family home. Multifamily homes of mixed usage, where you kind of average it across the units, is about a little over 1/10 to 0.15 acre feet per unit. And then if you have multi-unit that's restricted to single dwelling, single bedroom, one resident or a couple, you can see even less use, 1/10 of an acre foot, and sometimes we've seen less. The allocations remaining by jurisdiction, this is how much available water is out there. And part of the issue here is some of these entities have water. In the county's case, we know that the water has been allocated in the county's mind. The county always says, we don't have any more water to give. But the projects haven't come in for their permits. And some of these are projects that have been out there for 4 or 5 years where, we've encouraged both the cities and the county that have water but think they don't have water, hold the developer's feet to the fire and say, if you don't have your project going in 180 days or pull a permit, we're going to take back the allocation, and then you can reallocate that to somewhere. But then there's the cases of Pacific Grove prior to their local water project, or Delray Oaks, or even now Monterey, where there's just insufficient water to allocate to new projects. And we're not just completely talking about affordable here, but we're talking about housing in general, low and moderate income as well. Sand City, part of it was there were redevelopment agency projects, and when the governor yanked away the redevelopment agencies, you could still pursue those projects, but a lot of them were new metered projects, and there's no new meters being set. And so that's an issue that's different in different communities. What we have been doing is, about a year and a half ago, Ordinance 168 placed 9 acre feet into the district reserve for district discretionary allocation. So one of the approaches we could do is any city who's got a good project coming forward but no water to allocate is release some of that. Again, 1 acre foot could be 10 units. We've waived individual meter requirements for centralized hot water, like in the Van Buren Senior Housing Project in Monterey. We eliminated the inline meter requirement for ADUs. Well, we haven't done it yet because we flipped the agenda, but Ordinance 184 is on there tonight. And this is for ADUs in existing units where the prospect of putting an inline meter is just undoable. The reason we like inline meters is every consumer of water should be able to know what they're consuming, and you get a price point and indication. And if we ever got to rationing, you need to be able to count water. We've reduced or waived district fees for moderate and low-income housing. We've, if it's 100% low income, the fee can be 0. We've helped develop entitlement ordinances that have put water in the hands of the communities so they can make a decision. So in the case of Pacific Grove, their water subcommittee of the council made recommendations, and I believe now there's going to be a set-aside for housing, affordable housing. And then our HARP program supported direct water retrofits in the disadvantaged communities. So we've been doing what we can. The hard part is it's challenging to make water out of thin air, but we'll talk about how you can do that. But we've been very creative. So here's an example, Van Buren Senior Housing. We waived that individual meter requirement, but we also, using the rules that were in place at the time, got very creative working with the city, coming up with a way to move their water credit. And then afterwards, we redefined a site to include any city property, not just contiguous parcels. And what that enabled, and we did the same for institutions of higher education who are trying to build dormitories and we did it for public school systems who may want to build residential housing for teachers on surplus property. The reason we did that was to get rid of our contiguous parcel requirement and say, your system is your system. You should be able to move your water where it's needed. That's your general manager at the far right at the groundbreaking for the thing. So what we consider until the CDO is lifted. So back in Ordinance 87, we looked at the need that CHOMP had for expansion. We said, this is a public benefit. And we went out and we made findings that so much water had been saved through the different rules and regulations that the district had implemented. We identified how much savings based on a period of time, and we hand-wavingly said we will now create additional water exclusively for this public benefit project that can be used anywhere on the Chomp campus. You're actually in a position where you could do that again. We've reduced demand on the peninsula by about 3,000 acre feet since the CDO went into place. I can tell you the state would probably not be happy about it because we would be making more water available under our rules. They haven't fully recognized our rules, but our rules have been working for the community for all the time the CDO has been in place. We could claim recently expired water credits. So our water credits last for 10 years. We have spreadsheets on who has water credits, so we could go back 11 years, 12 years, 13 years and say, well, that water was in the hands of people who could choose to use it, repurpose it. They chose not to. We're now going to capture that and take it back into our district reserve. We could seek voluntary forfeiture of existing water credits. There are people we know who've got credits. They're sitting on them because credit has value. You don't know what you're going to do with it, but maybe you'll do something, or when you sell your house, there's a value to it. But we could run a program of trying to get people to say, here, take it for a higher, better use. We could ease the transfer requirements. Last time we tried to do transfers between commercial folks and the jurisdiction so they could put it back. We got sued twice and everybody backed off the CEQA work. There may be a different approach to CEQA that would allow us to do a mitigated negative deck and make it easier. We would have opponents to that because they think that that water's permanently retired to the benefit of the river, and they don't want to see it repurposed. We could consider allowing financial incentives. Right now, you can't charge anybody for a transfer. So we can, currently our rules allow arm's length between a commercial business and another commercial business, and I could transfer my credit to you or from one property to the other. They get challenged. As I said, SEEK was an issue, but they also can't be done for profit. Yet we've been approving all these entitlement programs where newly found water is being charged at a pretty significant rate. So we might be able to do something here to facilitate transfers. We could develop a conservation offset program, and now they're getting both a little more complex and a little more expensive, but here's where a developer comes in and we say, oh, you can have an acre foot if you can save an acre foot or save 1.5 acre feet over here. The problem with that for affordable housing is it can tip the economics of getting the deal done. And that's the same thing with allowing entitlements, which have currently been designated to a parcel. We could designate them to a region. So we could say Malpaso water, we're going to declare that 10 acre feet of Malpaso is being used in the Carmel Valley. And it's offsetting general Carmel Valley demand, freeing up the same 10 acre feet throughout the entire CalAM's main system. And we're now going to reallocate that 10 acre feet, 2 to Monterey, 2 to Delray Oaks, or what have you. I mean, so there's a way to do it. But the cost of entitlements are so high that it can drive the economics of a housing project under. So these are things that we can consider, that you might like to consider, and the idea would be to throw it back to the Water Demand Committee and tell your staff to develop any of these ideas further, or you might have new ideas of your own. But it's kind of where we're at.
Thank you, Dave. Questions?
Oh, it's actually more of a comment, so if you want to take questions first.
Yeah, I'll take questions first. Any directors have questions?
You put this on the agenda, you want to go first and I ask my question?
No, I'll let you go first.
We were talking about City of Seaside have water. How can they use their water? I think, will it some kind of way?
Yep, so we've had some emails going back and forth staff-wise, and I've asked questions where she said water is a constraint, and to ask this question, is it a meter problem or is it an allocation problem? So I think we're still kind of working that through. I think for all of the communities right now, getting a meter installed is a real hurdle. So raw land development just can't happen very easily. But I can give you an example. In Monterey, Carl Outzen developed a project, and then Chomp came in and bought it for affordable units for bringing in medical staff. And he cobbled together existing meters, most of which weren't really designed for commercial use or for large-scale use, but you can engineer around it. You can take a 5/8 inch meter that was designed for a single-family residence and fill the tank at night, so you got to design a tank. And then that water is available for your morning shower, and fill it again during low-use times during the day, and it's available for your cleaning your dishes and so forth. So in Seaside and any other community director, you need to look first to see, is it a meter constraint, or is it your perception that we don't have any water left, like the county's issue, and we need to take some of that water back that's never going to get built here in the next few years. So each place has a different issue.
So the 38, 37 acre feet Seaside have, would they have to will it, from inland, like DBO, or can they start getting meters?
So they can't start getting meters. That's the problem. Now, we recognize DBO and Cypress Investors LLC as entitlement water. The state doesn't. The state's recognized Pebble Beach, they've recognized El Paso, they've recognized Sand City. So it's kind of an unequal playing field, but we've recognized that we've issued permits against what we call front-loading agreements where DBO can sell water. So both DBO and Cypress have enabled the new building at Montage over here in Ryan Ranch. And you can set a new meter under entitlements. And so there's folks in Carmel Valley who could get a meter to connect to Cal-Am by virtue of having an El Paso entitlement. Same thing in Pebble Beach and so forth. There is no entitlement currently available in Seaside. So one of the ideas that were put up there is, well, if we made entitlements tradable, Seaside could go to Sand City and say, the water district's willing to say 4 acre feet are going into Sand City for general delivery, not a particular parcel, and I got a guy willing to pay you X $100,000. Are you willing to free up 4 acre feet? We haven't gotten there yet, and that's one of the potential things that we could do. But that's one of the most expensive alternatives, and that would allow you to set a meter. But otherwise, no, the moratorium on meter setting that the PUC passed was based on the cease and desist order, so until you lift the cease and desist order, you can't set a new meter.
Well, and then in equity in all of this is PG can't set any meters with their water.
Yeah, same
Pebble
issue.
Beach can.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions before we open it up to the public? Directors? No? Okay, then I'd like to open this item up for public comment.
Kevin Dayton, Government Affairs Liaison, Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. One of the priorities of the Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce is try to increase the supply of housing that's affordable. You may know that 87% of the people who actually work in Monterey don't live in Monterey. I think it's pretty obvious there's a traffic problem, and one of the challenges about that is that it's hard to find a place to afford living in Monterey. And I go to various local government meetings, some of you have been at some of them, where significant numbers of people are there to oppose any housing project. And they cite again, oh, there's no water, there's no water. Then you hear developers saying, well, we've got a water issue here, water issue there. It is a serious problem. I think some of you actually probably support the idea of building more housing. And you need to figure out how to balance this water shortage with providing that housing. And there are going to be people out there, and I've talked to some of them, they're on both the left and the right, who think that water, they believe water is a good excuse to try to keep new things from being built. I would like to see this agency work more aggressively to work with other local governments and with community organizations to try to overcome this tendency to use limited water supply as an excuse not to build anything. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Narigi. Dave, quick question. Because I was surprised not to see it on your screen, what's the status of Condition 2?
Condition 2, which Mr. Narigi is referring to, is a component of the cease and desist order that says that Cal-Am cannot serve to existing service connections an increase in use of water due to a change in zoning or use. And so an example of a change in zoning would be the measure that permitted a hotel at the American Tin Cannery. A change in use, where they're currently headed is a shorthand, where if it goes from residential to residential, no change in use, and no need to look further. It goes from commercial to commercial, no change in use, no need to look further. Going from commercial to mixed use, a problem. Going from residential to a bed and breakfast, there's a problem. And in fact, you know, what we do here, you guys in the business community know, if it goes from a paperclip store to a brew pub, that's a change in use. And we're going to say, where's your water coming from? In the state's view of condition 2, you could go from a paperclip store to a full-serve hot tub brew pub, and they'd say, look no further. And so we've kind of called them on that inconsistency. They also say we don't want to recognize the 3 places where water comes from under the district's permitting regime. There's a 4th one, but the 4 places we get water, so you come in with a pre-project, post-project application, and we say, okay, you need 1.5 more acre feet. Where's that going to come from? And it's either going to come from a city's jurisdictional allocation, where the city has water left, and they've said this is a good project, so here's some of our city's water. State doesn't want to recognize that. It could come from an entitlement. The state said, well, we'll recognize Pebble Beaches, Sand Cities, and Malpasos, but we don't recognize DBO and Cypress Investors or Pacific Grove. We've called them out on that inconsistency. Or it could come on a credit, a permanent abandonment of use, or a documented use that you're now restoring. So in the case of the American Tin Cannery, we documented their use at a point in time when it was 18.5 acre feet. So they've got 18.5 acre feet in our mind because a property owner can always repurpose it. But as base closure happened and things shifted, nightclubs closed. You know, think of the Chibo area that got converted to mixed use. The nightclub was in the process of, you know, selling alcohol and recycling it in the bathroom. You know, I mean, there was a high usage, and so we had a high number, and, you know, so water was available. And then the 4th area would be a transfer, and that's what we've been sued over, because people don't want water moving a half mile here. They don't want that. They wouldn't notice in LA. But we would recognize that, but there hasn't been a transfer since 2006 because of the lawsuits. We'd like to make it easier to do that, because a water saving here is water that should be available here. It should be fungible. This system is not so big. So they are developing language that doesn't recognize some of the entitlements, doesn't recognize the jurisdictional allocations, seems to be okay with on-site water credits, but not okay with transfers. And so that's a regime that is just completely unacceptable to us. Our board had passed a resolution saying, here's how we do our permitting business. This isn't new. We're just documenting our current practices that we've been doing for 30 years. And it's clear that that resolution and the language that they're working on, that we'll probably see something in November or so, aren't going to line up. And we've already talked to them about that. We've gone back up there a couple of other times to say, look, we're heading to bad public policy. This is not going to work. It doesn't line up with existing permitting regime. We're not going to play. We're not going to change. We have to be able to get things done. And so it's heading in a wrong direction. So when I speak to these things that we can do, these are all things we do on the local level. And the other inconsistency of where we're headed is, I doubt anyone's going to come in and complain about an affordable housing project. So if meters aren't being set and you're building a project off existing meters, California Americans never going to know. They're never going to see it. No one's going to come in and say, we want a meter set. But if it's a controversial project like a hotel or a large mixed-use development, and no meter needs to be set, so they don't have to go to CalAm, a community activist can certainly come and say, hey, we think this project over here is bad, and it's in violation of this, of the way you, the state, look at condition 2, but the water district's going to let this happen. And so then there's going to be an inconsistent outcome on good projects people like and bad projects people don't like. And so that's where we're headed. I think most of my board knows that it's been an issue. The last go-round with the state, we got the three most important decision makers in the room to sit and mull on it, so we don't know where it's headed. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
Daryl Chote, I rise again because this is what I really came down here for, not to get in that other battle. But I'm glad to hear David's presenting some of the things that I had like a 40-minute discussion with Mr. Riley at City Hall about it, and I'm glad he told me that it's on the agenda tonight. I did not have in mind at all to start doing single-family homes. I think this 9 acre feet of water you guys do have, I'm not saying give it to the cities. I'm saying you guys should be able to manage that 9 acre feet for one purpose and one purpose only. And that is to give permits to construct affordable housing at a 100% restriction on that housing indefinite. Now, every city has a mandate from the state now. And that mandate, unfortunately, can't be done at all because nobody does have water. Even Seaside has their allocation that is pretty much almost down to nothing because they have projects that are ready to go. So I think it would be better to keep the cities out of it. Don't even let them get into this 9 acres. It's not a, I mean, yeah, 9 acre feet or whatever it is. Don't get it in. I say that you should only push multi-family housing. And the reason why I say that is if you look at the homeless problem we have on this peninsula now, and I've lived here all my life, we never had this problem. But I can see why it's growing, and it's growing. If we keep battling the way we were in that last issue, it's going to keep growing because we're not moving. I was telling a guy, and I told George, on Ord Grove, I used to rent 12 years ago, $350 for 1 bedroom. That 1 bedroom now, $1,550. And I was talking to some guys, well, why is it so high? And I can tell you what I think. Well, they've stopped property transfer. There's no water allocations. So you can't build housing. So our policies are now starting to reflect in our communities. And unfortunately, if you can't afford the $1,550, the landlord is saying, hey, it's supply and demand. I'll get somebody else. So you got to go out. And you can't go nowhere else because everything else is now $2,000. Seaside is high. Like I said, our young people aren't coming back. They're leaving. They can't come back because it's too expensive for even a 1 bedroom, even a studio. Now, David, I'm president over the Del Monte Manor. We have 198 units, 1 meter. That's the way you can do it, multi-use. More families are going to get housing. If it's restricted forever, no matter where it is. Even Carmel need to put in some. You know, I couldn't believe they were able to transfer their low income to Watsonville. That's just not cool. I mean, that's not cool. I don't have a problem with affordable housing in Carmel, PG, or anywhere.
Thank you so much, sir.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. All right. Anybody want to give me their 2 minutes?
No. Thanks for coming down.
Not transferable.
Madam Chair, member of the board, Paul Bruno, Monterey. Unlike Mr. Chote here, I think that rather than having this board make decisions about affordable housing, I think you should do what you can to assist the jurisdictions so that way they can make their decisions about affordable housing. I want to thank you for the cooperation and assistance in trying to make things happen. The Cypress Pacific deal with Community Hospital worked because this board was able to make it work. And I think having a addition to the hospital is important for all of us, just as affordable housing is. I want to build more affordable housing. I've been trying. Years ago, we bought the roller rink thinking we were going to do mixed use with affordable by design units upstairs. Couldn't make it work. The water wouldn't work. Got rid of it. Someone else is building something now. But I am building in Marina. I'm building affordable housing units, affordable by design apartments right now. Getting ready to break ground. And it shouldn't be the burden of Marina to provide the housing for the peninsula. But the peninsula has not solved its water supply problem. So realistically, you need to do what you can to assist along the way. But ultimately, the only way to solve this is by solving the water supply problem. And I know we're working hard for that. It's really a shame that when I look at properties on this peninsula, I analyze every property I look at based upon how many fixture units it has. I mean, that's what values a property here. Should it really be the basis for the value? And I look at what can I do there that maybe can increase its use. It's unfair because, you know, people should be able to have affordable housing, and we're just not providing it because we have been stuck in this growth, no growth situation for all too many years. Thank you.
Members of the board, Jeff Davey, third generation resident of Monterey Peninsula. You know, this problem is not just the Monterey Peninsula's problem or this community. Statewide, we are below what we need to have in terms of housing, believe it or not, statewide. Last time I saw the graph since 1980, it's several million units have not been built in California that we would need to keep up with population demands. The Monterey Peninsula is just the same thing, but instead of millions, it's thousands. We haven't built thousands of units that we've needed since 1980, and it's not this board's fault. Unfortunately, it's the jurisdictions going back to the 1970s. Every city, all the county, some people have been here this long, so it may be their fault, but you know, we have not had a policy where we're trying to really build housing and support affordable housing in this community for decades. It's exacerbated by our water problem. That makes it all worse. That makes it so much more difficult. You got to find lots that have meters already now. You got to find lots that have water already now. You can't do these things today that you're trying to do that you should have done years ago. Not you, but people can't do it. And it's really the city councils and the board of supervisors for not changing the zoning and increasing density. That's not a bad word, people. You know, I also tried to do a project in Monterey on Casa Verde. I did 2 projects in Casa Verde years ago, and I wanted to build 16 apartments, multifamily, and the zoning was such that it would only allow 7 houses. Now, I'll make the same amount of money doing both things. It didn't matter to me. 7 houses for $800,000 or 16 apartments. I told the city, and they wouldn't change their zoning. It was so much per acre, that's it. So when you have cities and communities with a 14 unit per acre minimum or a 2-story or 3-story minimum, you don't have the ability to build affordable housing. You can give free permits all you want. It's not what you need. Increase the density and let the people build these units and require them to be low cost for perpetuity. I'm fine with that. If they're going to get increased density, then go ahead and give it to them. But go ahead and require it to be for affordable purposes. And that's not your problem. So I'm getting way off tangent here, but there's also people here from city councils, and they need to understand that's what it takes. Because you go to every meeting, people are opposed to projects. Not in my backyard. I don't want it here. It's not a good thing. It's the wrong thing for that project. But yes, we have to build it. And we have to start sometime. And right now, we can't even get meters. We have a huge water problem. And it's like, when is it going to end? So I applaud you for putting the agenda. I encourage you to find water to give to the jurisdictions, but I hope the jurisdictions have the wherewithal to allocate them for affordable housing and increase densities. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Davey.
Melody Chrislock, Public Water Now. So in about 18 months, we're going to have water. The Pure Water Monterey project can deliver that. The expansion can deliver that in 18 months by December 2021. Everyone, there's many in this room that seem to be acting like that doesn't exist, that project. So then you come to affordable housing. That water is about $2,100 an acre foot. If Cal-Am's desal goes down that path, it's $6,000 to $7,000 an acre foot. So which is going to create affordable housing? $2,100 an acre foot water or $7,500 an acre foot water? I think there's an issue here that people are acting like there's no water and you can't stop the desal plant because there won't be any water, and that's just not true. I mean, it's called a backup plan, but it's the better plan. It's a better alternative, better economically, better environmentally. I was thinking about all the money that I pay to Cal-Am every month that doesn't stay in this community. My last 2 water bills were about $600 on an acre, $600 a month in the summer. And, you know, a lot of my neighbors are $300, $400 a month. I know people in Seaside whose bills are $150 a month. That's a lot of money that is going to Cal-Am and then to New Jersey or San Diego. It doesn't stay in our community. There's no real economic benefit to paying Cal-Am this amazing amount of money that we're paying in water bills, and now they want more. And they'll always want more. But the idea that we don't have the water is about to end. 18 months. I mean, that's not long. After all this time, we're so close. But we have to make a real decision here. Are we going to go for the $2,100 an acre foot water or the $7,500 an acre foot water? I don't know which is going to create more affordable housing, but it seems pretty obvious if water, in fact, is the real key. Anyway, something to consider.
Thank you, Ms. Crislock.
Tyler Williamson, Monterey City Council. So I am wondering if it's possible to classify this situation as some type of emergency, which would allow us to argue with the state in order to receive some kind of additional allocation of water credits. It was brought up earlier in regards to the homelessness situation that we have in our region. I think just affordable housing in and of itself, and the fact that we're being stymied in order to provide the requirements that are required in order for us to meet the state RENA goals for our region. So I'm just throwing that out there in an effort to make an argument to the state to allow us to have some additional acre feet of water as we try to figure this out over the next year or so. Also, I just wanted to throw out there that myself and a few other elected officials on the peninsula have created a housing coalition, an affordable housing coalition, where we're trying to work together at looking at the affordable housing issue as a regional issue as opposed to something that's jurisdiction by jurisdiction. Because as you can imagine, a lot of the jobs are in the city of Monterey, where a lot of the workforce lives in the city of Seaside, Marina, and Salinas. And so everybody drives into the city, and if we are able to develop more housing on the peninsula, that's really going to help our workforce issues. And I would just throw in there that if we can develop more housing, particularly in the city of Monterey, we're going to create more opportunities for people to bike and walk to work, and we're going to reduce the amount of traffic on the roads. So this affordable housing issue is quite important, and one of the things that we've taken on as one of our priorities with this housing coalition is actually how do we figure out ways to allocate additional or any available water supply towards affordable housing. And so I appreciate Chair Evans putting this on the agenda here, and we hope to work with you as a coalition in order to find ways of allocating any additional water supply and making the priority towards affordable housing. I would also point out too that at our council meeting tomorrow night, staff has agendized what they did is they looked at all the available city property, and they took away some categories of properties like public parks, and they came up with 5 different properties where the council is going to have a discussion tomorrow night in regards to putting priority towards developing some affordable housing projects. So there is work being done. It'd be nice if we can use all 5 of those properties, but I think we would be limited by the amount of available water. And so this is something that we definitely want to partner with you all on. And again, thank you, Chair Evans, for prioritizing this tonight.
Thank you, Council Member Williamson.
Peter Mountier, PG Chamber. Firstly, thank you for putting this on the agenda this evening. I don't want to derail this too much, so I'll be brief, but I just wanted to point out Pure Water Monterey alone wouldn't satisfy the terms of the CDO. I'm not bashing that project. I think it's a great project, but the CDO can only be lifted in combination with additional water supply, aquifer storage and recovery, and water recycling. That's the desal plant. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this issue?
Craig Malin, City Manager of City of Seaside. Thank you so much for putting this on the agenda. I'll be very, very brief. Anything the district can do to give municipalities and developers additional options for water supply to affordable housing would be greatly appreciated and utilized immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. It's John Wizard from City of Seaside. Thank you for agendizing this discussion. I think it's probably the most important thing that local cities have before them and the county have before them today. And that's because water, as you've heard before and as a dominant paradigm in all of our conversations, is the key. to unlocking housing, to unlocking new economic development that pays for the services that support that housing. So specifically, if the district were to free up some of its allocation for ADUs that are naturally affordable by design, for permanent supportive housing, for our neighbors who are transitioning out of homelessness, for folks who want to deed restrict their ADUs or apartments for housing choice voucher holders, people who need to find somewhere to live to prevent homelessness. I think that's a wonderful way for the district to use its modest remaining reserve allocation. I'd like to thank Member Byrne for using the word equity. Seaside is a neighbor in your equity woes, specifically with the Peralta well after the basin adjudication. A significant portion of the Peralta water goes outside of the city of Seaside. And because we don't have an entitlement through that adjudication, we don't get to set our own meters as a municipal corporation. So it's difficult, to say the least. And then, as you heard the general manager say, that DBO and Cypress Holdings are not recognized by the state, despite being senior water appropriators within the basin's adjudication. So the avenue by which we might be able to put a meter in and then backfill that water allocation doesn't exist in the state's eyes. So we hear you, and we agree that there should be a different paradigm there so that we can actually get some stuff built. I will say that I'm a little bit worried about the idea of kind of an open market for the district's remaining water allocation. I think that it's a scarce resource, and so the highest bidder wins. And typically that's not affordable housing. Typically that's not economically distressed communities. That's going to go to places like, no disrespect meant, it's going to go to PG and Carmel and places where people can guarantee a return on that investment in the shortest amount of time possible, and that's not going to be Del Rio, Sand City, and Seaside. I agree with Councilmember Williamson that we should get more housing in Monterey because you want, and Mr. Davy, because you want more dense communities and you want people to walk and bike to work to get the cars off the road. So it's all very complex. Make the water available, support people who don't make a whole lot of money, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Councilmember Wizard. Appreciate it. Anybody else? Okay, seeing no further public comment, I will close that and bring it back to the board for discussion.
I have a question. Is it the district that set up the rule that says you can't sell your excess water to another entity within your city? That was the district.
Credit,
Right.
that you can't sell it, yeah.
Because that's one area to unravel, because almost every project we do, there's some amount of water left on the table, whether it's 0.2 acre feet or, 0.2 units or 0.01 unit. There's water that's left on the table, but people aren't going to just give that away. You know, when the Grove Laundry went out, they sold all that water. And then that's about when the district made a regulation against doing that. I think that needs to come back, because that is something that could be accumulated if they could sell it back to the jurisdiction. And it could be reallocated. People would do that. Otherwise, they're going to sit on it.
Well, I think that you're right, and when I laid out the going from easier to harder, one of the things was go take the recently expired credits and just harvest them. The other one was try to get voluntary, and you're hitting on that one, that it has currency, why give it up? Right. And the third is allow some fiscal initiative to happen.
So if that's a district rule, there's one thing that we could do right off the bat.
And right now, district rules prohibit taking a commercial credit and giving it to or doing a transaction free for residential, and vice versa.
But if
and
it goes through the jurisdiction, if it goes back to the city, and then it's reallocated, but if they can sell it back to the city for, it could be an established units per acre or whatever.
Yeah, so there's some financial incentive, sure.
Right, right.
Yep.
So the second thing that I would say about affordable housing is do not blame it all on water. The cities have got to make a commitment to quit charging the kind of fees they're charging for permits. For a modest project, the owner just paid $12,000, not my fee, not the engineer's fee. This is just all the requirements of the city, and the city planning and building permit fees. So the cities need to take it on and cut their fees, because the fees are supposed to relate to the exact amount of time it takes to process that application, and obviously, it's far and above. So, don't blame it all on the water. Coastal Commission itself has made it unaffordable in this whole area.
Point. Any other directors? Comments? Director Riley?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're not in the land use decision-making business, so that what we do can't really relate to what's actually going on the ground. But I think if we can make some water available to jurisdictions, and maybe under some restrictions, some limits, I'm a little curious about the emergency ordinance idea about how we could get around some CDO restrictions. And if there's a possibility that legally we could establish something like that, I'm not sure if it's really that kind of emergency, but if there's a rationale along those lines, particularly to get around the restrictions that seem to be overlaying, all of the decisions. I'd like to see that explored, but I'd also like to see the recommendation to send it back to staff and come back with some reasonably simple implementation options. And maybe down the road we can get more complicated later, but I would like to see something more on the quicker side and the simpler side than just the whole range of options that you've laid out.
Yes.
Two things that Director Riley raised. I do believe the attempt to create an emergency or a health and safety issue has been raised. I think Mayor Peak made an inquiry and was rebuffed by the State Water Board. But I'd have to check that, but I've heard that. As far as timing goes, I think we're really simply trying to solve a short-term problem. If there's a permanent water supply within 3 years, we don't have this problem. And so what we're looking at, and timing probably is of the essence, is how do we get the projects that can get permitted and started in the near term addressed, because it won't be a long-term problem if we can get water supply.
I would like to suggest this comes back to water demand with some sort of basic proposals, and we hash that up.
Jeannie, you mentioned the water credit transfer issue, and that was that kind of had a tortured history for a while, in that there was the allegations there needed to be some environmental review done on that. And the thought at the time was that perhaps each jurisdiction would pony up some form of money, because it benefits the jurisdictions themselves, whether it's the municipalities or the county, to go ahead and actually solve the problem. I think that would create enough money to go ahead and get the environmental work done, because you're not going to find one applicant out there that wants to go ahead and do an entire study on the transfer and do the environmental work associated for one project. As far as the expiration of taking back of water that hasn't been used in an expedient manner, I have kind of an issue with that, in that there are some extenuating circumstances when people pay for all of the work necessary to go ahead and get the planning done with the architectural, as you know, and all the other associated permitting things you need to do that have a cost associated with it. And then because of a personal issue, because of market changes in the market, there's reasons why they don't move the project forward. So I mean, I'm not opposed to having a discussion about that, but I think it does take an awful lot of risk on the part of the developer to say, I'm going to be able to use this water in a 6-month period or a 1-year period. So, but I do support the idea, and further, if George, if you were inclined to want to support the emergency declaration thought and find out what the history of that was, I think that would be worth doing. So, but I do think the water demand issue committee is the place to go.
Very well. Howard?
Thank you, Chair. Director Riley brought up something. I worry about this because it get us in land use. And that's one thing I've been fighting ever since I've been on the board. This board is not up here for land use. But I agree with we need to help. And the way we help is this. We send it to water demand. It used to be something around here, we used to have the pack and tack. To tack an advisory from the cities. Get in a room with water demand and help come up with something to help the cities. So I would recommend that we try to, bring the TAC back, and it goes to water demand, and we don't have an allocation to give out now. And if we had one, could we give it out?
Well, we do now, we reinstated the district reserve language, so now the reserve exists, and the ordinance 184 created 9 acre feet.
Okay.
So we have that ability.
So we can get,
Yeah.
they can use this water, yeah. I get it to the back and tack and, well, you know, and see what we come up with and try to get that water out there and try to use it as soon as possible.
Okay, any other directors? Mary?
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I feel like I've really learned a lot this evening in this discussion. To me, it's one of the most important things that we've talked about for a long time. I think that everything that we're talking about hinges on the whole ability for us to be able to provide affordable housing for our workforce. It has everything to do with traffic. It has everything to do with having multi-generational families. It all links completely together. When Dave was talking about this possibility that we do have water that we might be able to use for affordable housing, I can't say how much that just sparks hope in me. What I worry about, though, is when I talk to people who do development and I talk about the ideas that we've all been talking about tonight, people tell me that aside from the water, that it's simply too expensive to build affordable housing. As you had indicated, too, that would stay in affordable housing in perpetuity so that people we would be able to keep it in the affordable housing bank. I think the question then goes to, well, what is affordable? And if you look at the workforce that we have here, the people who are having to drive from Greenfield to Monterey to be able to work in the hotel business, or the other way, to live someplace north and have to go all the way to the Salinas Valley to work, the traffic is so driven by that because the employee base is working in the industries that pay the least. So I think when we talk about affordable housing, it's not affordable for people who are like attorneys or doctors or teachers. I think we're really talking about real workforce housing that we have to look at here. And I know that that's expensive, whether you've got water or not. It's just a really hard thing for people to come to grips with. The work that I know that Tyler is doing, the coalition that he's pulled together, looking at housing, it's a really good group of people. And I think that there is hope. But it makes me feel, as I said, it makes me believe that if we do take, you know, if Water Management District is sitting at the table with the economic development people and the 5 parcel people, I feel like we're going to get a whole lot further along in being able to really make some changes that are going to benefit all of us, just at the get-go. So I just wanted to be able to put my own personal opinion in this in the hopes that we might be able to do something that'll really make a change, that'll make a change for everybody as long as we are able to be around and the generations that follow us. So thank you just for letting me speak my mind.
Well, that's what discussion is. I also learned a lot tonight. Very good ideas were presented. My hope for putting this forth was to figure out a way really to partner with the jurisdictions and leave them in the land use business and keep us on the water side of things. But since we have no action on this, I think, but what I have been hearing, it sounds like the board would like staff to kind of refine a few proposals perhaps and bring that to water demand. And so I think that's the best way to proceed, unless any directors have an objection to that. I think that's kind of what I've gleaned from this discussion tonight. I'm going to take.
Can I just add one other thing? I understand that the state CDO is a pain, but I would like to see the district push the envelope on small little ways that work in this community that may not fit their complete definition, but if it's small and it's pushy, I'd like to support that.
I think that's what Dave has been doing.
Yeah. Very well.
Well, I'm glad we said it. I'm glad we said it because that's a big push on my own. We need to take the state on, you know. Just don't hem me up. Take them on.
All right. So on that discussion, I'd like to take 5 minutes before we I would like to take a 5-minute break and then reconvene to finish the business for the night. So let's meet back here at 9:25. Thank you. And we will begin with item number 12, public hearing. Consider adoption of urgency ordinance number 184, amending the requirement for permanent water submeters for accessory dwelling units in existing structures.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Your first question is going to be, what's the emergency or urgency? This is an issue that's sprung up with a current permit in process where the permit applicant has even gone so far as to go to the state housing people and ask for a legal opinion. We've also provided a legal opinion that we can require inline meters, but now we've realized that the practical implications are that for existing structures, so an ADU inside an existing structure or being put into an existing structure, that the plumbing that's necessary, these are not expensive meters, and it does provide a volumetric signal as to what your water use is, and so you get the price point and everything. But getting them installed in an existing structure is very challenging, number one. Number two, it would ease the process, which seems to be everybody's goal, and save $375 on the project. But the urgency simply comes from it's an ongoing issue on one permit that's in process and another one that has just begun process, and so we thought we'd try to get clarity. All urgency ordinances have to come back and get memorialized in a permanent ordinance at some point in time, but we just bring this to you now. The new construction, we will still require the inline meter to be available for two reasons. One, so the tenant and the owner can resolve who's using what, and then if we ever have to go to rationing, we'll have a data point.
Great.
Okay, directors, any questions? So my question is, so the urgency is just for one particular permit holder and one that is
And one
that has just begun
yeah.
the process. So is there any reason why this couldn't be done in the regular ordinance making process?
Yeah, because we wouldn't bring it to you until September, and it wouldn't go into effect until after second reading and a 30-day CEQA review, so it'd be 90 days.
And they're in the middle of construction, so.
One of them is.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Question. Right.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's other cities out there that got ADUs I've been hearing about. I think City of Seaside, I think city manager could correct me, but they got about 90 of them. ADUs. So I hope that this ordinance will help them. And I think putting this in effect will help them. And do we have to go through making it permanent?
Yeah,
Instead of 1 year?
Yeah.
So, okay.
But it would also signal what the ground rules are to anybody planning. We just had a conversation about folks in PG who got pretty far down the line and didn't even know there was a moratorium on setting of meters. And so I think, just from our standpoint, saying, okay, here's what the rules are going to be going forward. There's bound to be more coming in for processing their applications. So, but it's not super urgent system-wide, but at least provide a signal.
Moving forward, and helping, I think all the cities, once they find out that it's in effect. So, good job.
Okay. Any other questions? Director Hoffman?
So in reading the urgency ordinance, it seems to me that a necessity to clarify what the term new means. In my reading of this, it seems kind of vague. That was the first comment. The second one I have.
Do you have a question? Or can we save comments for after
what
public
does new
comment?
mean?
Well, yeah, Dave can answer that question about the
Okay,
determination
okay.
of new.
It sounded like a statement and not a question. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, it means somebody coming in, and you brought up Seaside. So there's some homes that are lucky enough to have, 3 bathrooms, 3 or 4 bedrooms, and they'll come in and parcel it off. And for us, there's a definition of what ADU means, and separation and so forth. So we would identify that as a new ADU, not new construction. I mean, obviously, walls and things like that, and putting in a sink and so forth would be new construction. But we look to the ADU, and if it's a new ADU in an existing structure, that's what this applies to. So where there wasn't an ADU before. So like a granny unit, you already own a shed, and you're gonna convert it to a granny unit. Or you already own a pool house, and you're changing it over to a fully, full residential ADU. That's a new ADU in an existing structure, as opposed to building a new pool house with a residential unit in it, which would be new construction and new ADU and would have inline metering required and so forth. So.
And so the other question I have is, do we have an option of, instead of adopting an emergency ordinance, to issue a waiver in this specific case?
Right, we don't. We could not issue a permit or issue the permit with the requirement, and then they could appeal it, and it would come to you on appeal, and it would be the same kind of 90-day process, probably 60 at a minimum.
Okay.
All right, great. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll open it up for public comment, if any public is left.
Hello again. My name is John Wizard from the City of Seaside. I agree with Member Byrne that we should eliminate as many fees as feasible so that we can focus people's finances on getting the actual housing built and not tied up in the logistics of entitlement. It can be kind of expensive to do that, so if we don't have to charge folks $375, which might seem like a paltry sum, if I'm going to pay interest on that over 10 years to finance an ADU, it's going to be more than $375. The other thing that I'll say is to Director Edwards' comment that there are close to 100 units in Seaside that are not legal. We don't know where they are. We don't know who's running them, but we know that they exist. There is some state law that talks about retroactively approving at the time of construction. And so if they did not include a sub-meter or inline meter when they constructed it, and it wasn't required, we wouldn't require them to do it as part of their permitting process. They're after the fact, after the benefit permitting process. But I don't know if the district would then, if that would create any kind of logistical challenges in getting the certificate of occupancy. So reducing barriers, reducing institutional obstacles that people in unique situations might encounter, I think is all good. And I know that I rarely will say this out loud, but I am sure that my mayor would agree that the minimum that we can impose upon people to make things legal that are already providing a benefit that we all talk about needing to create more of, the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Wizard. Any other comments from the public? Then I will bring it back to the board for discussion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve from Director Potter and a second from Director Edwards. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, Chair. So Dave, looking at on page 203, the actual language that's being added in the italicized and bolded, it says contained within an existing space, yet there's no definition of what existing space is. I would suggest that that be defined as a built before such a date possibly, but it seems ripe for being interpreted many different ways and causing problems.
Mm-hmm.
I think that language is clear to me. I don't have a problem with it.
Well, I'm thinking there might be something that's not capitalized in here anyway, because we might already have a definition of a single-family residence. But we can clean that up, and certainly with the permanent ordinance, maybe add a definition in Rule 11. But yeah, I think for now, for the purposes of moving forward, it's the old walks like a duck kind of thing. We can probably survive with this language in this one, and then clean it up or add a definition in Rule 11 when we make it permanent.
I would go along with that.
When will is it staff's intention to wait until the sunsetting of this emergency ordinance to bring the
Probably
full
not.
ordinance?
We'll probably bring it with a cleanup ordinance. So, but I think that, what's 180 days for urgency? I should know that.
1 year.
1 year, yeah, so clearly before 1 year is out.
Okay. All right, so any other further discussion? We have a motion on the floor. Okay, then this is a roll call vote. So, Arlene?
Director Byrne,
Yes.
Director Adams,
Yes.
Director Hoffman,
Yes.
Director Riley,
Yes.
Director Edwards,
Yes.
Director Potter,
Aye.
Director Evans.
Aye.
Unanimous approval.
Great. And then I will move on to item 13, which is an action item. Consider approval of additional expenditure to right-on-cue hydrology for technical support for the Carmel River Basin hydrologic model.
Is it ready to go?
And Thomas, what we talked about earlier in terms of speed is even more crucial now.
It'll move
Exactly.
fast.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, this item here is action item 13. We're considering approval of additional expenditure to right-on-cue hydrogeology for technical support for the Carmel River Basin hydrologic model. Real quick here, original contract was for $58,000, and we are requesting an additional $15,000 for right-on-cue for development of MATLAB scripts that process model output, as well as carrying out a sensitivity analysis of the Carmel River Basin hydrologic model. This team has been composed of Jonathan Lear, myself, Richard Niswanger, Mike Hutnick of right-on-cue, which this item is about, and Justin Huntington. Basically, the Carmel River Basin hydrologic model is based on code developed by the USGS called GS Flow. It basically accounts for precipitation and runoff and also interacts with the groundwater aquifer. And these models are integrated and talk to each other with and account for feedback processes. Just real quick, here's the Carmel River watershed. Here's the model grid that is placed on the watershed, and you can see the flow networks of streams and mini drainages. Here's a close-up of the grid. You can see this running through the Palo Corona Regional Park, which was formerly the Rancho Cañada Golf Course and the main stem of the river there. This is a 100-meter grid. What goes into this model is basically rainfall is placed on the watershed. It accounts for temperature, evaporation. We use the stream flow for calibration. We look at pumping by CalAm, and we look at groundwater levels, and geology is a part of the model, soils, and channel geometry and aquifer parameters. Question has come up, what is the model used for? It's going to be to determine outcomes of the Los Padres alternative study. We're going to be looking at how the river would change in association with possible changes at Los Padres. One of those would be dredging and increasing storage, or another alternative that is part of the study is the removal of Los Padres, and how does that impact the reservoir, or not the reservoir, how it impacts the stream below the reservoir. These are some of the scenarios that we've built so far, where you have a calibrated historical model that has observed versus simulated. We are going to look at current Los Padres operations and how the cease and desist order would impact flows in the river, along with ASR diversions, so that we can have some answers of what the river will look like with changes in operations. We also know what the river, based on this model, will help guide us how it could look if the reservoir was ordered to be removed and still having CDO compliant pumping, as well as ASR operations and other various small components associated with the scenarios. This is not a standalone model that's only going to be used once. It'll be used in the future. It's very common for water districts to have hydrologic models. This tool could be used for future water rights applications, for state board hearings, any kind of future operations of tweaking on where pumping occurred in the watershed, and even incorporate climate forcing, where you change the rainfall and what does that do to flow in the river and flow to a reservoir. So just here's a quick example of output. We have flows here that show
the measured flow, and then the most dramatic difference is you see the red line, that is a environmental release, an aggressive release from the reservoir that puts more water in the river, versus a green line, which is water held in the reservoir. So you can see that it's not distributed downstream, so it tanks and drops quicker than an environmental release that would be released for river processes. So now getting back to really the meat of this staff note, we want help to take raw model output, which is not as exciting as graphs, that looks like this with thousands of rows, and creates figures like this, showing flow and time, and allows you to do descriptive statistics such as, when would a flow be below a certain threshold. And then the second complicating factor while we're here tonight is that the Los Padres alternative analysis study has some challenges because we have to build consensus with regulators. There's a technical review committee that looks at all of this information. So the concept is that the model would be reviewed and the results would be reviewed by the technical review committee and be, for the most part, accepted by all the members, so that when you have the final report, people believe in the results. NOAA's on the technical review committee, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, AECOM, the consultant, CalAm, and the Water District. So we're really trying to bring everyone with us in this process, and it was really NOAA who requested the sensitivity analysis, which is the second part of this funding request. And the sensitivity analysis really taking model parameters and making slight changes to see how the model reacts. And NOAA wants to see this so that it can help them understand the scale of small changes in the model with relation to scale of removing something such as a reservoir. And with that, I'll leave it at questions and comments. There's the dry river and the wet river, and that's where we're trying to get to with the model here. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Any questions from directors?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. Do NOAA and all these other agencies, do they put money into the pot, or are we the only ones that put money for this stuff? They come up, I seen on here 56,000. And now we approved that during the budget. Now you're back for 15,000. I'm not knocking you, but hey, how come all of it can't come up at one time? We approve the budget, that's what we're gonna spend, but do NOAA and all these other agencies come back, we need 15 more thousand to do this?
Yeah, so to date, it's been CalAm and the district who've been paying for the model. We try to express to the regulators and NOAA that, we can't continue adding special features all the time. They actually wanted temperature added to the model. We said it was very expensive, and I think for now we've managed to water temperature to steer clear of that. The sensitivity analysis, I think, talking with a lot of people, it is a fairly common thing that's done with water resource planning tools. So it was, it's something that we hope we can do. But to date, no, they're not bringing money to us. So all we can do is just express the fact that we're trying to keep costs down.
Okay.
So do you have a sense or breakdown of the cost of the sensitivity analysis versus the cost for doing the scripts portion?
I believe the scripts is probably 50% of it, and the sensitivity analysis 50% of it. Because what will happen is there'll be, multiple runs over and over, and making fine, refinements to parameters, and then there's also versions of scripts. A script will be created, and then you will choose to add another item to the script, such as, can you now show me what are diversion days, just beyond a plot. You want to add what days are diversion days on the plot so that they show up on the plot.
in the absence of NOAA or NIMS requesting the sensitivity analysis, would we do it anyway?
I think based on the research I've done and talking to people, I believe it's a good thing to do because this is something that could possibly be used at the state board and people will ask that question. So it was an oversight on our part that we were so excited to build the model. We weren't thinking way out into the future about, somebody questioning it and saying, okay, well now show us how sensitive it is to certain changes. So I believe for the cost, I believe it's a good thing to do, especially for a tool that could be used for the next 15 years easily.
Thank you.
So this is kind of a statement leading into a question. NOAA and NIMS, essentially their focus is taking all dams down, and our study is really how do we retain it. What is our remaining water rights if the dam was to be taken down, there was no reservoir, what happens to our remaining water rights?
Yeah, our remaining water rights, we've been parceling them off for aquifer storage and recovery. So, you take the existing diversion to storage right where the storage was up the river, and you change the point of diversion down to where the wells are, and the place of storage or place of use is over in the aquifer storage and recovery facilities. And there's actually a nexus between the two. But yeah, if the dams were taken out, then we'd still have a diversion to storage right that we currently have, and we're trying to develop a strategy for the remainder piece, the 2808B piece. So you could still divert to storage because we're not diverting to the new Los Padres Dam where the water right came from anyway.
But we still have some remaining water right.
Quite a bit, yeah.
That would disappear if the dam wasn't there.
Not necessarily, but it could disappear if we don't come up with a strategy for retaining it. And by the way, this kind of modeling can be used to reassess the in-stream flow requirements for our existing water rights and then try to get them combined up into a better permit with either longer diversion period or easier to meet in-stream flow requirements, and that could extend the water rights. But eventually, that's all just going to be subject to the use it or lose it doctrine that, all right, we've given you a certain period of time. In our case, it's coming up 2020. And if they chose to, they could revoke the remaining water rights irrespective of the dam being in or the dam being out. I think the answer to the dam being in or dam being out is probably another decade of fighting anyway. They're already at their early conclusion. A lot of this effort is to show that you may in fact benefit from a wetted front longer with storage in place,
Right.
as we've talked about.
Because at one point, it seemed determined that if the dam wasn't there, the river would go dry at some point during the summer.
Probably more frequently, yeah.
And I know one of the people in NIMS had made a comment several years ago, and how much do we spend saving the fish? 2-point-something million?
Yeah.
And she said, but if the fish die naturally, it's okay.
That is true.
So, I mean, all these studies are really to preserve our right on the reservoir versus their focus on not preserving it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the value of the model is that, we're going to gain some information, especially when you yank the reservoir out. We're going to see really what the model says about how far the river would dry up.
Right.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I'll open it up to public comment. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for discussion.
I'd make a motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion from Director Byrne and a second from Director Adams. Is there any further discussion?
Just one comment. When y'all start getting these things that we want to, in budget form, I don't care if you put a contingency in there so you don't have to come back to the board. And tell those other agencies, hey, you're gonna have to start paying too if y'all want all this information, because it's just like adding on.
Yes.
So if you can't get it all, put a contingency in there, so you don't have to come back in front of me and I sit up there and I might say no one time, just to feel better.
Okay.
Like this time.
I had a comment too. I think during the admin discussion, there was a question about how far would NIMS go if we kind of opened the checkbook? And I don't want them to get the idea that just because we open the checkbook, the door's still open. So I'd like them to know that, you know, enough's enough, and we know their agenda, and we know that that's not our agenda. So we need to defend ourselves as well as cooperate, so.
Thank you.
Put a stopper at the door line, at the door level. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, my sense is that NOAA and NIMS is routinely moving the target or coming up with new stuff depending on new staff coming on board and old staff leaving. And I don't know, I just get the sense that they believe they can ask for anything they want because they think they have us over a barrel. And as is pointed out, they're not contributing anything financially to this effort. So my thought is, at some point, enough's enough. Now, maybe since you had indicated that the sensitivity analysis that you believe is an appropriate thing to do as well as the script, so if it's going to be valuable to us regardless of what value NIMS or NOAA gets out of it, then okay. But I think doing stuff simply to please NOAA and NIMS where we see no benefit it should stop. Thank you.
Fair. Okay. So on that, I will call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And we will move on to number 14, consider findings pursuant to Public Contract Code Section 3400C and expenditure for Santa Margarita Water Treatment Facilities equipment pre-purchase. Maureen.
Good evening, board. I have too many papers with me. I don't know which one of these words. Okay, thank you. Good evening. I'm here to request the board to consider making findings and an expenditure related to the Santa Margarita Water Treatment Facility. I apologize, I didn't think we'd go so long. This is a little long. Permanent disinfection facility is needed for the Santa Margarita site. We've talked about previously that the middle school site is currently only used for injection. We're not allowed to produce from that site because we don't have disinfection facility. We can't put disinfection chemicals on the middle school site because it's elevated above a playground. We have conveyance in place to take water from the middle school site to the Santa Margarita site. We're going to need additional production capacity from the Seaside groundwater basin to produce the pure water Monterey water that is coming. The water treatment facility is going to be the least expensive way of getting the additional production capacity for the pure water Monterey water. The district owns the Santa Margarita site. We're responsible for capital improvements. The district operates during injection. That gives us really good oversight of the cheapest replacement water supply we have on the peninsula. CalAm operates the facility in production mode. CalAm will be the sole operator of the disinfection works at the Santa Margarita site. CalAm maintains all facilities. During design reviews for the disinfection facility in May and July, and 4 follow-up emails from myself to CalAm staff, CalAm identified standardized equipment in use in the Monterey region. You can standardize on equipment for many reasons. A large part of it is reducing operations and maintenance cost. You know the performance history of some equipment. You're not going to rebuy something that's going to break in a month. The spare parts, if you're buying one set of goods, you have to stock less spare parts. Additionally, you've got hot swapping available to you, so you're paying to stock less spare parts. If your maintenance, whether it's preventative or repair maintenance, is executed through a vendor maintenance contract, their costs are going to also be lower because they're going to have fewer spare parts they have to keep in stock. Additionally, it's fewer contracts to manage. There's a less fiscal advantage to the equipment they've sole sourced and increased reliability. If the operators are training on one particular type of equipment, maintenance is training on one particular type of equipment, you have lower training costs, and when something needs adjusting in the middle of the night or when it needs to be fixed in the middle of the night, all the dials turn the same way, all the wires are the same way. It's a little increased in reliability. Excuse me. Mid-morning today, I received a revised list of the equipment they want to standardize on. That was issued today to the board and to the public. What I think happened is they looked at the list of standardized equipment, and we were having a number of conversations as we were going out to bid and compiling the list of standardized equipment to understand why it was required to be standardized. We're a public agency. They looked at items that would have a long-term impact on their operability and said, you know, if we do go out and allow these to be bid with an equal substitution allowed, I apologize, I'm not using correct grammar. If we allow equal substitution, the cost of maintaining that, in their opinion, would exceed their ability to operate the system and their O&M costs. That was about half the items, and those are the items without green notation in the handout we gave today. The other half of the items were items that they do not know of a alternate or equal substitution. The designer reviewed the items, and he, in researching it, was also not able to find an equivalent product. So CalAm said they're comfortable with us labeling those pieces of equipment that have no known equal as specifying them or equal in the bid documents. I know I'm not being clear, I apologize. So instead of saying no substitutions, we can say, hey, bid this or equal. There's a cost associated with that that we will need to beef up our standards because there was a no substitutions clause. We didn't go and meet with CalAm to verify that we had all the requirements listed to make sure that when we do get a submittal on that product, we can review it and make sure that the right product is being installed. At the Santa Margarita site, we're going to be treating a large volume of water. The volume of water is going to vary. The quality of the water is going to vary because we're producing different waters, and the water is going to be conveyed to the Forest Lake tanks to serve the peninsula. So everybody's interested in having this facility work right. So we really want those specs to be tight if we're going to allow substitutions. Additionally, we're going to be paying consultants to review some additional submittals. Because the operator and the designer don't know of any equipment that provides equal function, we're not sure whether we will have any different outcome than bidding them no substitutions, but we won't know until we do it. So Public Contract Code 3400C provides that a material or product can be designated by brand name to match other products in use in a public improvement, provided the awarding authority makes a finding that is described in the invitation to bid. The Public Contracting Code encourages us to bid items, bid equipment, materials, and services in some case, where you can have a or equal designation, but they do allow for some exceptions. The first exception is if you're going to test out a piece of equipment, so you want to see if it's going to work. You want to buy that piece of equipment because you're running a test on it. That's not our case. We're not testing any new equipment. The second is to match existing products in use. That is our case. These are products that CalAm has in use on the peninsula. It's also in order to obtain a necessary item that's only available from one source. The invitation to bids went out stating that findings made pursuant to Public Contract Code 3400 will be incorporated into special conditions. In the special conditions, I state that the board will potentially make findings tonight, and the result of the board meeting will be posted or issued in an addendum. So my request to the board is to find that specific brands or trade names identified in the specifications and call for bids are designated in order to match other materials, products, things, or services already in use through the system. And Chair Evans, I can pause now for discussion or make it's a quick second half to this action item.
I say go for it.
Go for the quick second half. One long lead time item was identified prominent chemical feed systems. Prominent only distributes through pre-selected vendors. There is one vendor for each region in the U.S. I called to find out if we could solicit bids from multiple regions, and they said no. So I'm requesting that the board authorize the general manager to enter into a contract to purchase prominent chemical feed systems from the authorized supplier in the amount of $80,469.28 with a 10% contingency for expedited delivery if that's available or if it's required. I'm hoping it's not required. To be authorized by staff for a total amount not to exceed $88,516.21. And I have both components of my request on the screen. Questions?
Directors, any questions? Director Hoffman?
Yeah, Maureen, I'm kind of confused because your item describes sole sourcing, yet when I looked at the document, the quote from Hopkins, it seems to indicate that it's not simply the purchase of disinfection equipment, but a quote for the complete construction of treatment assemblies in Pittsburgh that would be then shipped from Pittsburgh to California at a cost of $2,500. Is that assessment that I just stated correct?
It's I've used the phrase chemical feed system. I think the technically correct term is chemical feed skid. I just used system because I thought it was more understandable. So the components of the skid get put together on the support in Philly, in Pennsylvania.
In
Yes.
Pittsburgh, actually. Did you check and confirm that Hopkins Technical Products has a valid contractor's license? Because I checked the California Contractors Licensing Board and was unable to validate that they have a license to construct these skids.
I did not check. Would it be in Pennsylvania that they would hold their license?
I think it's Pittsburgh, California, isn't it?
No, it's Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, right?
No, public agencies are required to use appropriately licensed contractors for work in the state of California, so these things would need to be completed by an appropriately licensed contractor. I assume that Hopkins was provided design documents by Pueblo in order to put together the quote?
That is my understanding. And I don't know what level of design documents versus conversation that they had. I don't know what specifically was provided. And I don't think they're going to be doing contracting work in the state of California. So this would be like assembling a skid.
With constructing, building a treatment system, actually 8 of them, and then shipping them here at a cost of $2,500 plus. They're going to bring out 2 people for travel expenses, so another $4,900 for that. Were any other appropriately licensed contractors in California provided an opportunity to provide a quote for building these treatment systems?
Hopkins Technical is the vendor that we can purchase the prominent skids from in our region. So again, because we asked if we could solicit bids from other regions, they said no. We had to go with the vendor that Prominent has designated for our region.
Yeah, but I went on the website and called them, and I can go and purchase a Prominent pump and build a skid as a contractor without purchasing a whole treatment system from them. So that's not a restriction, the fact that in that case.
I believe it was on the list of, to have the skid was on the list of sole source items from CalAm.
No, it was not. Actually, it was the Prominent pumps themselves, the metering pumps, and a couple of other items. Actually, if you look at the parts list for the various treatment systems, only about 26% of the items, or 21,000 of the 80,000, are actually the sole source items. The other question I have is, part of the quote is construction of 4 potassium permanganate treatment systems at a cost of about $32,000, which is about 40% of the total. Now, potassium permanganate is not typically used for disinfection. It's for iron removal and or reducing hydrogen sulfide. So how is those 4 treatment systems related to and necessary for disinfection at Santa Margarita?
I asked the same question of the vendor. We had a scope change about midway through the first half of the year to add stabilization facility with a phosphate chemical. Right now we're looking at phosphoric acid. So I've asked the vendor to verify that, I've asked the vendor to verify that the potassium permanganate is indeed for the stabilizer system.
But you're asking us to approve the quote, including that right now, without having that information.
I see, for the disinfection and versus water treatment. Yes, I understand what you're saying. I was told I have been using water treatment because we have 3 bays in there. We're going to have multiple water treatments. And I apologize, I've been using disinfection and treatment interchangeably because we're also not doing the settling basins and the typical items that come with water treatment. Maybe chemical treatment would have been a better word, better phrase.
But as I pointed out, this potassium permanganate is for iron removal and for H2S. And I'm not aware that the Santa Margarita wells have a problem with iron or with H2S generation.
To my knowledge, well, the native water, but it's going to be for the stabilization of the waters as we're mixing waters in the pipe so that we don't have any incidents like what happened recently with the waterworks in New Jersey.
I don't know if you're aware, but in California, all equipment that has wetted surfaces must be NSF 61 certified. And I don't see in the quote where any of these items are documented as being certified and under NSF 61.
We'll make sure that happens. Again, the designers got the quote. I'm confident that Steve knows that we need to be NSF 61 certified, but I'll confirm.
But here's the thing, we have a quote that we're here to approve, and we're approving something we don't know that the parts list is NSF 61 certified, and that it turns out it's not, then the quote maybe becomes invalid, and the contractor who's building these things says, oh, well, it's going to be more money now.
say that here in the letter, though? In cases not noted, already noted or mentioned in the specs, all products would also need to be NSF 61 rated?
Yeah, that's what, that's from Cal-Am to Maureen.
Right, correct.
Yeah, but with
See if
respect
that
to the
helps.
development of this quote, as far as I can tell, and it seems like Maureen doesn't have any information, the contractor, if you want to call it that, may not have been told of the requirement that all this equipment that has wetted surfaces must be NSF 61 approved. That's only, that's the question
Seems
I
like
have.
if they're putting in a bid, they're obviously aware of those conditions. This is equipment that Cal-Am uses under normal circumstances.
Individual pieces are things that we use, but, yeah, so, and Pueblo, somebody who does water design, so I think that they would have NSF 61 approved items, but it is a good item to verify, I think, too, just in terms of, if it's not NSF 61, you can't use it, so it's a good item to check also, but Pueblo does these designs, we use this equipment, I think,
Right.
yeah.
But to the
I mean,
extent that,
obviously, they do this in California, so they're aware of California regulations. Okay.
I mean, if we're issuing special conditions, can't you just append that in special conditions?
This would be a pre-purchase directly with the supplier, so it wouldn't go through our bid documents. I'll confirm that it's NSF 61. Our designer's aware that we're in California. Thank you. The supplier distributes to California water treatment works, and we were told at the design review meetings that the skids were what we should be purchasing.
I don't have any more questions.
Do any other directors have questions for Maureen?
Move approval.
I would like to open it up to public
Sorry.
comment first.
I'll
I
second.
thought we had public comment.
Okay, we can have a motion in a second. I'm still going to open it up to public comment. Seeing, we have
Let me just say something really
Public
briefly.
comment.
I just noticed that this does not include the state and local taxes and fees. So maybe we just need to add a little bit more contingency to that, which is about $7,500 more, because the tax in California, we'll have to pay taxes in California, which would be about, on $72,000 project, will be about $7,200 taxes. So I don't know if that was factored in the contingency or not.
It was not.
okay, thank you.
Do you include that in your motion?
So
I
would you
would,
like to
add
include
that
that
to
in
my
your
motion.
motion?
I'll s-
For
Would you
contingency.
also
second.
like to include the NSF 61 stipulation in your motion?
Sure. To be verified. Yes.
Very well.
Just quickly, under discussion, is this gonna be on time? You're going through a lot for it to be late, and you talk firmly with Cal-Am to make sure this is right before you send it out again, I don't mind you bringing it back before, like next month, if something really wrong, but really check this out and really make sure they on time. There's a lot of money going out there, and we paying for them to be on time.
I will make sure the vendor's on time and cross-check all of the items brought up today.
Wasn't that what the contingency was for? So it was 88,000 for.
The contingency is if we needed an expedited delivery,
Right,
if that's
Yes.
available.
expedited delivery.
The taxes,
Additional 72.
It's about $7,500.
Well, expedited delivery got you up to the 88,500,
yes,
right?
and that would only be spent again if we needed it, and if
Anyway.
And
got a motion in a second.
is that personnel counted in the training too? Somebody from the district counted in being trained on that piece of equipment or facility?
with Cal-Am, that'll be a part of the project, and yes, the specialized vendors often come in to do training. We're doing that on the project next door.
Yeah, I just want to make sure somebody in this district is trained to use
Yeah,
that
this is
equipment.
Got it.
More likely gonna be a certified Cal-Am, because this is for production and treatment. And
Yeah,
so
I know,
that end
but
of
we're
it-
building it and we don't have nobody in-house than?
Oh, I suspect our pump
Well,
and pipes.
yeah, I was hoping that, yes, that he, every piece of it. Thank you.
Well, because we won't be operating it.
I know it, but we still need to know.
So is there any further discussion? Well, I'm going
Yeah.
to restate the motion, if I may, as a motion to approve the staff recommendations, include an extra 10% of the purchase price for tax, and to require a NSF 61 certification prior to purchase. And that was the motion from Director Riley and a second from Director Byrne.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I see this as a violation of the Public Contracts Code competitive bidding process. It's one thing to purchase equipment. It's another to circumvent competitive bidding for building these treatment systems, which any licensed contractor can do, putting the pieces together. Serious concerns about that. Also, serious concerns regarding whether these folks are even licensed to do this work in the state of California. So, based on those two things, just real serious problems with this.
Okay, any other discussion?
I just hope we check on all that
I will, yes, sir.
and get back to the board.
I will.
Thank you.
Okay. Then all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
And the motion carries 6-1. Move right on into number 15, consider expenditure for the Santa Margarita Water Treatment Facilities Construction Management Services. Maureen?
In July, we issued an RFP for construction management services, typical construction management service and inspections, project documentation review, community outreach, and pre-construction meetings would be work to be handled before construction. The change order management, field order management, submittal review, construction meetings, all that would be handled during the construction phase. Post substantial completion, there's dollars to support startup. Project completion, we don't need the landscaping and the fencing in place in order to use the water treatment facilities. And project closeout. The work is part-time. We're going to be constructing through the winter. Weather's going to be a factor. Additionally, subcontractor delivery or subcontractor schedules and component delivery can change your schedule. The construction manager will need to be flexible. I contacted local jurisdictions and water purveyors, notified 7 firms that we had an RFP on the street. 3 firms attended the pre-proposal meeting, and 1 firm submitted. Feedback, the other 2 firms called me to say the reason that they did not submit was because they couldn't balance their profitability with our affordability on a part-time job like that. The background from SOMAS is they're employee-owned, about 600 employees. They've been in business for 72 years. In 2018, SOMAS acquired Cavello Group with over 250 years of combined experience providing CM services for water resource projects. They're a California-based company, and the CM team is local. The team will consist of a project manager, lead inspector, and field engineer, and various sub-consultants as needed. Staff in Monterey 1 have been working with this team for 1.5 years on the project next door. The contract will be awarded on a time and materials basis. Obviously, only receiving 1 proposal. Construction managers aren't hungry. They have no interest in padding a job. If they don't need to work the hours, they're not going to need them and bill us for them. I'm requesting that the board authorize the general manager to enter into a contract with SOMAS for the amount of $190,280 with a 15% contingency to be authorized by district staff for a total amount not to exceed $218,822. Questions?
Okay, thank you. Directors, any questions? Director Hoffman?
So in our package on Exhibit 15B, which is draft contract, us and SOMAS, the contract references exhibits A and B, which are scope of work and budget and fee schedule,
Yes.
and I look at the end of the contract, and all that's there is a blank page for scope of work, and there's actually no page of the budget.
I have it on mine. I have it.
Page 249.
Check the board packet.
Yes, actually the excerpts from the SOMA's proposal, that you see in color.
In color.
So these, so they responded to our RFP that had our scope of work, and they presented their understanding and approach, which has,
It's in Exhibit 15B.
yeah, so it's their understanding and approach became the accepted scope of work and the staffing plan as well. The construction management services price proposal became the budget and fee schedule.
Where is that reflected in the language of the contract? Because there's no reference in the contract that's being proposed here to reference the SOMA's proposal
Oh,
for the budget.
I see. 15B got labeled 15. Oh, that's Exhibit. That's right.
15B is
Yeah,
the-
I'm sorry.
Page 261 is what 15 exhibit 15B is.
But in the contract, it's Exhibit A. So it's Exhibit 15B in the board. Exhibit A, scope of work, goes from page 249 to page 259.
That's what you're looking at as a scope of work.
Well, what I'm seeing is understanding and approach, understanding Cal-Am's needs, integrating new construction. That doesn't look like a scope of work to me.
If you look on page
Yeah, it's kind of a.
252.
Pre-construction phase, 253, construction phase, contract administration, change order management. These are the agreed upon services, basically.
And where does it say that in the contract? I guess that's what I'm trying to.
It just refers to the scope of work, which is Exhibit A. It's definitely throwing people for a loop, having the first page say intentional blank, because it's inclusive of the next 9 pages. Similarly, for the budget and fee schedule, the first page says intentional blank, so it's like, well, where's my Exhibit B? But it's really the construction management services price proposal section from the consultant's proposal, memorialized as the budget.
So on page 262 of Exhibit 15B, there's a table which says summary of scope of services, says preliminary price proposal. So is that not, in fact, the price proposal, even though that matches what you're talking about?
It is the price proposal.
Okay, and so what is the basis for us reimbursing the consultant for work completed? Because if you look at the following page, 263, there is a table, and the scope of services of what they're going to be doing is not referenced anywhere on page 263. So if they come back and say, I spent 50 hours on contract administration, how are you going to pay that when there's nothing in the budget which identifies that task to be done?
Can you rephrase your question, please?
I'm just saying, so SOMAS does work on contract administration. So many hours, and they want to bill us 1 month for X amount of dollars. Based on the budget, there's no line item in the budget for contract administration. So how?
Well, it's in the summary preliminary price proposal, the bottom 2 lines are contract administration, and then the 190,280 number tracks to, they say on the more detailed price proposal in letter F, level effort summary spreadsheet that follows, you go to that one, that's where your 190,280 is derived. So those two numbers match up. That is your budget and includes those activities.
And 263 are the estimated hours. And this is, you said this is a time and materials.
It's time and materials, we don't know.
Yeah, so they're estimating what kind of hours they're gonna spend for each of these employees.
Yes, that's the fee
I
schedule.
don't know how it could be more clear.
Oh, because there's no tasks identified on 263.
We don't know if
No, but
they're.
they don't have to identify each person may do part of some of these different tasks.
Exactly, and so the way it works in the real world is that a
Not in
consultant.
my world.
When the consultant submits a bill, they identify what tasks they worked on.
Well,
This
they
does not
will.
provide
They'll
the,
submit a bill that says, principal spent 3 hours on construction administration, 2 hours on inspections. I mean, they'll break it down when they submit the bill.
but what I'm pointing out is that's not reflected in this budget that's shown here.
It's reflecting the number of hours that each employee is
Yeah, we think
estimated
it
to
is.
spend.
We think construction administration is on page 253 as part of the scope. It's as part of the price proposal on page 262, and then the breakdown that builds up to the small graph on 262 is the detail of time on the professional. So it holds together like many contracts we've seen before. It's just, I think the formatting, and there's a little extraneous information in here, but it's not the first time we've pulled the budget chapter of a consultant's proposal and put it in Exhibit B.
Are there any other questions?
Do we have any penalties in here if they're not on time? It's a question out there that you could ask them.
Alvin, this is a construction management. It's not
Okay,
the
yeah.
construction contract.
Well, the manager, if he's not on time,
The,
you know, they
the
managing these things
contractor,
and they not on
It's time and
can we get them?
materials.
the contractor will definitely have liquidated damages if they're not on time. The
Okay.
construction manager is there to, represent us and manage RFIs, submittal review, track all of that.
Okay, just
so they're
wanna make
not-
sure that they're doing their job and we can penalize them if it's not, you know.
We'll penalize that contractor if it's not, for sure.
Whoever.
We'll
Cost
penalize
and
the
everything.
contractor.
Yeah, the real risk with time and materials and construction management is if the contractor starts screwing things up and then there's more construction management required than anticipated at the outset, so.
As long as,
You're a contractor, you know how this works.
as long as something in there,
I don't have a
because
problem with it.
I just don't wanna see us go through what next door is going through to get something done.
Yeah.
And,
I actually need to leave.
so,
I'm gonna sit
We're
there.
gonna get there.
and
We're gonna get there.
It's
Hang in there.
yeah.
10:30.
So, I would assume that additional construction management services will be in the calculation for liquidated damages.
Thank you,
Thank you.
thank you.
Is that from the old job or the new job?
Both. I will open it up to public comment. If there's any public comment, speak now. Forever hold your peace.
Move approval.
Second.
So I will close public comment and entertain a motion, which I have from Director Edwards and in a second from Director Potter. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. If we had more time, I'm sure people would really want to discuss informational items and staff reports. But since nobody's jumping up to do so, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you for hanging in there.
Thank you.
Are you good to get home?
What? Yes. No, I'm going home with Heidi.
Oh, Heidi's okay.
Thank you.
You're not gonna be at public outreach?